Chapter 204. After Ning Ke left, the girls of the Great River Kingdom were still excitedly talking about what had happened. Cat Girl soaked her little feet in the hot spring and said happily, "Brother Zhong is indeed a disciple of the academy. No wonder he is so powerful." Zhuo Jihua looked at her with a smile and said, "I had guessed it the first time we met. Otherwise, why did the Hill Master ask us to be so polite to him? If it were someone else, we would have driven him miles away." Then she sighed and said, "Fortunately, this senior brother of the academy showed up. I think those people in the Yueluan Kingdom and the Yin camp will behave themselves and won't send people to rob us." Catgirl was thinking about some details of the battle. Her little feet tapped on the surface of the stream, and she raised her head slightly. She asked curiously, "Senior brother Zhong didn't use any cultivation method to defeat that stinky monk. I didn't even feel any fluctuation of psyche power from him. Senior sister, is he a cultivator?" Zhuo Jihua was startled and said, "I heard that there are no talented people in the academy this year. The strongest of the 6 in the course of magic skills, Mr. Xie, has only entered the no-doubt state. Since senior brother Zhong didn't enter the course of magic skills, I guess he can't cultivate?" She said this hesitantly because she didn't believe that an ordinary student of the academy who couldn't cultivate could so easily defeat the monks of the White Tower Temple with his sword and arrows. In a quiet corner of the yellow cloth, the hot spring gathered and dispersed. The winter sun shone down from the treetops, gilding everything with a layer of dazzling halo. The black-haired girl in white seemed not to hear the conversation of the girls. She calmly held the brush and slowly wrote. As the tip of the brush moved, her beautiful hair slowly poured down her shoulders. Then, a letter from the Yin camp broke the happy silence of the mountain stream. Today, Ning Ke had embarked on a completely different path from ordinary cultivators. He always held himself to the principle of cultivation without the purpose of defeating the enemy is a waste of time, and constantly tried to learn in his daily cultivation life and combat practice. In a sense, although his state of cultivation was still ordinary, he could already be called a master, especially when facing ordinary cultivators. If he had accompanied Chao Xiaoshu to fight the Spring Breeze Pavilion, it would have been much easier to face the swordsmen of South Jin Kingdom and the monks of Yueluan Kingdom. If he had been asked to kill the sword master in the lakeside house in Chong and City, he would not have been so badly injured. Of course, if he were to encounter those grand cultivators in the Knowing Destiny state, or powerhouses like Prince Longqing or Wang Jinglu, no matter how fast his reaction was or how powerful his fighting style was, he would still be scared witless and fall to the ground, waiting to be beaten to death, no matter how fast his reaction was or how powerful his fighting style was. However, if Ning Ke really met such a powerhouse in the wilderness, he naturally had other means. Whether it was the talisman Taoism skills that he had never used in the battle, the brocade bag given to him by Master Yen Sei, or the primordial 13 arrows that gathered the collective wisdom of the back of the mountain of the academy, they would all be his means to save his life. With a calm and objective judgment of his own strength, he had a relatively accurate assessment of the danger of entering the wilderness. He was clear that it was impossible for him to forcibly snatch the tomes of arcane from the various powerhouses. However, it should not be a big problem to secretly watch or occasionally play some tricks to cause some trouble for Xiaoho. Hiding his identity and sneaking into the wilderness was good for sightseeing. If the situation suddenly changed and he really angered those unworldly sublime beings with a wave of their hands, he would be forced into a dead end where he could neither escape nor hide. At that time, he still had 2 last means to save his life. It was just that those 2 means were not known to outsiders. "Your Excellency, you want to enter the wilderness alone? I swear to die rather than obey you." On the surface, he was the trusted lieutenant of the general's mansion, but in reality, he was the secret bodyguard of His Majesty. With an indignant and resolute expression on his face, he drew several small flowers with his shiny steel saber in front of him. Then, without hesitation, he put it on his own neck. "If you want to leave me behind and enter the wilderness alone, then please step on my dead body and get out of this room." Ning Ke looked at the lieutenant who swore to die as if he was returning home, and shook his head helplessly. The Imperial Center Administration and the secret bodyguard were directly under the Imperial Palace, but there was no connection between them. Therefore, the lieutenant did not know his purpose of entering the wilderness. Ninke did not care much about the lieutenant's nervous attitude. He was more concerned about how he should enter the wilderness. It had to be safe and convenient for him to retreat. The best way was to break into the palace with thousands of Tang elite cavalries, cross the Hullen Sea, and go straight to the Desolate Man's tribe. However, how could he find the tomes of Arcane with thousands of elite cavalries? And how could he hide it from General Xiao? Riding into the wilderness alone seemed to be a rather heroic choice. However, although he believed that it would be easy for him to survive with his ability and familiarity with the wilderness, this choice was too obvious. It would be too easy for him to become the most obvious target. Riding a black horse with an arrow on his back and straight to the palace alone would obviously tell the spies of the judicial department of the Divine Hall and the wilderness and the informants of various forces that he was very powerful, confident, and narcissistic. Only the immortal sun was qualified to be so arrogant, confident, and narcissistic. If Ninke were to rise on the grassland like a sun, he would attract everyone's attention in the shortest time possible, and then his identity would be found out. All forces knew that he represented the will of the Tang imperial court and the academy. Even if they did not come to kill him, they would have countless ways to trap him somewhere and make him unable to get in touch with what he wanted to get in touch with. The general's mansion of Tuyang City did this. Therefore, Ninke was guarded by dozens of Tang elite soldiers and could only roam the frontier fortress all day long. At this moment, the lieutenant who was holding the saber on his neck and looking at him solemnly and resolutely did the same. Therefore, Ninke could only frown and think of something else when he looked at him. Tell me, what is the best way to enter the wilderness? The lieutenant was stunned and showed a look of grief and indignation on his face. His saber was already on his neck, but His Excellency did not care at all and still insisted on entering the wilderness. Moreover, he even asked him for a way. Could it be that His Excellency would only look at him when his right hand trembled and the blade made a cut on his neck? Ninke suddenly thought of the yellow cloth by the lake and stream, and his frown gradually relaxed. He looked up at the lieutenant, who was still holding the saber on his neck, and said, "I have something for you to do." Among the students of the academy who came to the frontier fortress for practice, there is a student named Zhong Dajuan. He is now in Chengshan camp, and I went there with you a few days ago. I want you to find a way to imprison him and not let him have any contact with the outside world. Also, you must do it secretly. Can you do it? The lieutenant held the saber and felt that his neck was a little stiff. He felt that his action was a little funny and answered in distress. It should be no problem, but His Excellency. Ninke waved his hand and did not listen to his advice. He said seriously, "Don't try to stop me in this way. I have never been afraid of dead people, not to mention those who seek death themselves." The lieutenant was disheartened and thought that it was really a great misfortune to have such a cold-hearted superior. Ninke looked at his posture of holding the saber and said, "You are holding the saber with your right hand. If you want to commit suicide, shouldn't you turn the blade horizontally and place it on the right side of your neck?" Only then did the lieutenant realize that there was something wrong with his posture of holding the saber. He lowered his head in shame and ran out of the room with his hands covering his face. Ninke shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He reached into his lapel and took out all the waste tokens after a long time. He wondered when he had become a doryman. He had a lot of trump cards and even more waste tokens. The ones given by the Academy, the Secret Guards, the Fish Dragon Gang, the Imperial Center Administration, and the ones given by Third Sister Yulian were piled densely on the table. They were made of wood, gold, stone, or neither. They were of different colors and luster. How can I make every waste token play its most important role? He looked at the waste token on the table and thought seriously. The waste token of the Secret Guards was useless on the grassland, but there must be spies of the Imperial Court in the Left King's Palace. He could use the waste token of the Imperial Center Administration to order them. If he was really forced, the waste token of the Academy would be thrown out like a magic weapon. Aunt Cuny Maddie, who had a high status in the Yueluan Kingdom, and Princess Luchinjia, who was famous for being infatuated, wanted a hot spring to soak in. It was not an unreasonable request. However, the hot spring had already been occupied by the female disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom. Therefore, this request became unreasonable and caused a dispute, which led to more unreasonable things. They were all cultivators who came to help Yin under the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace. The Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom only sent ordinary disciples, and the Master of Calligrapher did not come. The White Tower Temple of the Yuelin Kingdom was led by Aunt Chu. Moreover, the flower addict Lu Qinjia had a well-known relationship with Prince Longqing of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall. Therefore, both the Divine Hall and the Yin Kingdom had a clear attitude towards this dispute. Ning Ke defeated the monk of the White Tower Temple and temporarily protected the ownership of the hot spring for the girls of the Great River Kingdom. However, not long after that, an extremely difficult task fell on the group of girls. The countries of the Central Plains decided to negotiate with the Left King's palace. In order to show their sincerity and show their benevolence and peace, the Divine Hall's Department of Light called on the countries to collect a batch of food and send it to the wilderness to help the people of the palace get through the winter. Even a most righteous idiot would not do such a stupid thing as keeping a tiger as a skewer. Therefore, the quantity of this batch of food could not be too large. It was only for symbolic purposes. Since it was symbolic, it naturally had to be sent to the palace before the midwinter. However, it was freezing cold and deep into the wilderness. They could encounter the horse gang at any time. It was difficult and dangerous, especially when the commander of the coalition army was only willing to send a small number of cavalries to escort the food. This task seemed even more terrifying. It was the girls of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom who accepted this task. The girls of the Great River Kingdom followed the cavalries to escort the food to the wilderness. Naturally, they could no longer occupy the beautiful hot spring by the lakeside. No matter what danger they would encounter on the way, it would be their own responsibility. Cat Girl said angrily, "This is too much. We should reprimand the Divine Hall." A female disciple said sadly, "This transfer order may have the intention of the Divine Hall." Cat Girl opened her eyes wide and did not understand her senior sister's words. How could the Haoyin Taoist Divine Palace, which was sacred and righteous in the hearts of the believers in the world, do such a thing? Zhuo Jihua said bitterly, "Prince Longqing is the future emperor's son-in-law of the Yuelin Kingdom. Who do you think the Divine Hall will support? Although there is no evidence, we can guess the reason for this transfer order. Aunt Chu of the Yuelin Kingdom has always been very vengeful. But senior brother Zhong is a student of the academy, and he is in the Blue Water Battalion of the Dongsheng Stockade Village. She can't do anything about it. Of course, she will vent her anger on us. Otherwise, how could she show her arrogance?" The girls of the Great River Kingdom by the mountain stream thought of the danger they might encounter on the long journey and were very worried. They all looked at the black-haired girl sitting at the small table in the depths of the yellow cloth. "Hill Master, now that things have come to this, you must stand up and speak. In recent days, I have written it with the greatest perseverance and hard work. Day after day, I am afraid of tomorrow. If I really can't write it, I will tell everyone. If I can write it, I will not say it. I am grateful. To be continued. If you like this work, please come a Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 205. What are you talking about? The black-haired girl didn't turn around. Her tone seemed to be much lower than that of a normal person, so she seemed to be unusually calm, or it could be said that she had no emotions at all. Zhuo Jihua and Cat Girl looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes. Zhuo Jihua took a few steps forward and said in a low voice, "If the Divine Hall knows that Hill Master is here, they won't be so partial to you, Ellen." The black-haired girl picked up the brush again and quietly wrote on the table. She said, "Since we have received the Divine Hall's edict to help Yin, it is natural for us to accept the military order and assign tasks. How can we be partial to them?" Zhuo Jihua said anxiously, "The palace is deep in the wilderness. With us escorting the provisions, what should we do if we encounter horse gang, rogue soldiers, or even some malicious people?" The black-haired girl dipped the brush in the ink and said softly, "So what?" Zhuo Zhihua had been with her for many years at the foot of the mountain in the Black Ink Lake. Zhuo Zhihua knew that this was her character. She was not indifferent, but obsessed with books and ink. She didn't care about most things in the world. However, now the disciples of Black Ink Garden were facing a very dangerous situation. She was the only one who could save the situation, so she couldn't continue to be indifferent. Zhuo Zhihua clenched her fists slightly and looked at the black hair pouring down her back with a solemn expression. She said, "If Hill Master didn't show up, we might have died in the wilderness. You might have survived, but I would definitely die, and so would the Bobcat Girl. Those shameless and insidious villains would be delighted by the news of our deaths. The Yueluan Kingdom, which has always wanted to oppress the people of the Great River Kingdom, might even celebrate." The black-haired girl beside the table slowly put the ink brush back on the inkstone. After a moment of silence, she put her hands into her sleeves and said calmly, "But why will we die?" Zhuo Zhihua heard that she was still as usual and became more anxious. She said with a bitter smile, "Because we are no match for the enemy." The black-haired girl said calmly, "If all the disciples of the Black Ink Garden are promoted to masters of the see-through realm, or if there is another grand cultivator of the knowing destiny state like you, who would dare to be so rude to us even if we go deep into the wilderness? Who would dare to frame us with such a ridiculous trick?" Zhuo Zhihua was stunned and didn't know what she meant by saying these words at this time. Because the disciples of Black Ink Garden are not strong enough, they will be bullied. Therefore, they will be afraid of this situation, afraid of death. If we are strong enough, we will not be afraid and will not be bullied. The black-haired girl's voice was as flat and smooth as the thin ice on the surface of a lake. If you want to become strong, you must have the courage to face the trials. Why did no one in the world dare to despise the Chang'an Academy? That's because their ordinary students also have to participate in the battlefield training and go to the most dangerous places to accept the test of life and death. When faced with difficult situations, don't always think of asking me to speak up. In the eyes of the world and all of you, perhaps I have an undeserved reputation, but you don't know that in this world, an undeserved reputation is the most powerless thing. Power always lies in power itself, just like how the brush and ink always lie in the brush and ink itself. Cat Girl stood beside Zhuo Zhihua and looked at the black-haired girl. She couldn't help but frown and ask, "Senior sister, your realm is already so high. Isn't it powerful enough?" The upper see-through state. It sounds really good. The black-haired girl said calmly, "Wang Jinglu of the Tang Dynasty is known to be invincible below the knowing destiny state. Prince Longqing is only one step away from the knowing destiny state. Yi Hongyu, the Tao addict, even Prince Longqing is afraid of her." What is the upper see-through state? These three people were the strongest in the young generation of the world. She mentioned them indifferently. Although she was warning her fellow disciples, she also revealed an aura that she was naturally qualified to be compared with these three people. Catgirl listened to these words and stuck out her tongue. She said, "Senior sister, what you said is not reasonable. Even if these three people have a high state, they're just similar to you. If you want to say that they are more powerful, they're only grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. But the problem is that such grand cultivators are either great divine priests of the divine hall or peerless figures like Uncle Master who founded a sect. Ordinary people can't meet one in their lifetime. How can it be so easy to meet?" The little girl's words were right. Grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state were like divine dragons in the world. They were known, but could not be met. They occasionally showed their faces in the clouds and instantly hid in the deep mountain courtyards. It was extremely difficult to meet them. However, if Ning Ke heard these words, it would be difficult for him to have any sympathy. He got along with them day and night and often consulted them, such as Second Brother who carried a wooden club, Pippi who fought with him for crab porridge, Master who stayed in the brothel every day, Chao Xiaoshu who floated far away, the Nation Master, younger brother of the Emperor Professor Huang, not to mention the headmaster of Academy and eldest brother whom he had not met yet. grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. What was the difference between them and cabbages everywhere in the field? The black-haired girl had made up her mind. Although the girls of the Great River Kingdom still had many ideas in their minds, they had to keep them and began to prepare for departure. However, standing by the lake, looking at the distant wilderness which was more mysterious and dangerous than before, Zhuji could not help but show a worried expression on her face. They came from the south of the mainland and had never been to the wilderness. Whether it was food, climate, geography, or culture, they were all blank. The allied forces of Yin Kingdom had sent guides, but how could those guides be reliable? Who wouldn't be afraid of entering a completely unknown world without any reinforcements or sect backing them up? The young cat girl was more carefree. She was angry at the unfairness of the Divine Hall and the shamelessness of the people of the Yueluan Kingdom, but she was not afraid to enter the wilderness. She believed that as long as Senior Sister was there, no danger was dangerous. So she still had the leisure to remember the osmanthus cake of Lotus Restaurant in Chong and the knife light in the snow that day. She trotted along the lake all the way to find Ning Ke to say goodbye. Ning Ke listened to her talk about the situation faced by the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. He was silent for a moment and then looked at the blushing little girl and smiled. There were many emotions hidden in his gentle smile, such as, "Sure enough, I am so awesome," and so on. Cat Girl stared at him and suddenly said, "Senior brother, your smile is really scary." Ning Ke was stunned and asked, "Isn't it very gentle, sincere, kind, and simple?" Cat Girl giggled. The silver bell rang by the lake and shook off a few snowflakes. Ning Ke looked at her and made his smile look more peaceful and casual. He then said calmly and casually, "It's really a coincidence that I also have something to do in the wilderness." Cat Girl's eyes brightened and looked at him and said, "Senior brother, you also want to go to the wilderness?" "Yes," Cat Girl exclaimed with admiration. "Alone? You are really great. I am very familiar with the wilderness." Ning Ke, who had succeeded in abducting the little girl with the osmanthus cake, smiled slightly and thought that he had been a guide when he left the wilderness last spring. It seemed that he still needed to be a guide when he returned to the wilderness this winter. Although he had guessed that the girls of the Great River Kingdom might be suppressed and ostracized, it was more of luck than analytical ability. Ning Ke was not an immortal who had ascended to heaven, so it was impossible for everything to go according to his plan. Cat Girl took him to the campsite of the Black Ink Garden and told Zhuji about it. Zhuji frowned slightly and looked at Ning Ke in confusion. She asked, "Senior brother Zhong, you are a disciple of the academy. It seems to be a little inconvenient. In the novel, if you were going somewhere to do something and suddenly met someone who wanted to go with you, then that person was either a bandit or a fugitive who was looking for someone to take the blame. As long as one had some experience and was not as naive and gullible as Cat Girl, they would feel that there must be some problems hidden in this coincidence. Because Ning Ke was a Tang person whom the Great River Kingdom was willing to get close to, and he was also a student of the academy, and these days he had become familiar with the girls of the Great River Kingdom by exchanging food with each other. That day he even killed the monks of the White Tower Temple to help them out of trouble. Zhuji was not willing to associate him with any bad aspects, so she politely refused. Ning Ke asked, "Why is it inconvenient? Are you worried that the Divine Hall will be unhappy if they know that the Tang people have sneaked in?" Zhuozhua slightly bowed her head, indicating that she acquiesced. Ning Ke smiled and said, "Then I will dress up as a disciple of the Black Ink Garden." He looked at the disciples of the Black Ink Garden who were busy packing up not far away and sighed in his heart that the master of calligrapher was so relieved to let such a group of inexperienced boys and girls come to the frontier fortress for experience. Since we're sending grain to the wilderness, I think no one will check whether there is one more person in the team on the way. If my identity is exposed, well, I think the younger brothers and sisters of the Black Ink Garden should be trustworthy. His tone was calm and gentle, but with an irresistible force. This was the skill of words. He directly threw away the question of why he wanted to go and only talked about the problem of going with him, which was equivalent to leaving the basis of the discussion behind. Zhuozhihua was speechless and did not know how to answer. She thought that if she did not agree with this seemingly enthusiastic senior brother of the academy, her tone would inevitably be stiff and she might offend him. Ninkei looked at her with a smile and said, "Any other questions?" At this moment, a calm and stiff voice came from behind the yellow cloth. "The question is why you want to go to the wilderness." The yellow cloth was lifted and the girl in white slowly walked out. She had black hair and white clothes, and a wide blue cloth belt was tied around her waist, which made her dress more plain and clean. Ninkei recognized that this was the girl who stood on the branch and looked at the lake in the morning. He did not say anything, but just smiled and bowed with hands folded in front. The girl in white had black hair casually draped over her shoulders, but not a trace of disorder. Under her long and slightly sparse eyelashes, her calm eyes were looking somewhere, as if there was no accurate focus, which made her look a little indifferent. Her white cheeks were slightly round, without any expression, and she seemed to be holding something in her mouth dully. Her thin red lips were pursed into a straight line. No matter in eyebrows, skin color, or expression, this girl could not be called a stunning beauty. However, all of them were extremely beautiful. Ninkei, who was as short of adjectives as someone, quietly looked at her and thought for a long time. He could only praise her beauty deep in his heart, but really could not find any more accurate words. The most eye-catching thing was her eyes, which did not drift, but no one knew where she was looking at, so she seemed a little dull and a little indifferent. It took Ninkei a long time to take his eyes back from her eyes, and then he noticed more details. There was a cute pink hairpin in the girl's black hair. Because of the cold weather, the tip of her nose was slightly red. This inexplicable cuteness finally diluted the dull indifference. He repeated the girl's question, "Why do you want to go to the wilderness?" The girl in white looked at him, but also seemed to be looking at the tree behind him, waiting silently. Ninkei was a little unhappy by some disdain that might be hidden in her eyes, and said, "Why do I want to go?" "Because I am too bored staying in Dongsheng Stockade Village." "How about this reason?" This was obviously said in a fit of pique. The white-clothed girl did not get angry. She continued to stare at him, or at the tree behind him. Ninkei suddenly felt that in this world, besides Sang, there seemed to be another woman who could defeat him. He could not help but shake his head helplessly and laughed at himself. Of course, this is not a good excuse. I admit this, but I believe that you should also believe that I will not harm you. I am familiar with the wilderness. If I go with you, it will bring you a certain degree of convenience. You help to cover up my identity, which is exactly what I need. So this is a win-win choice. The girl in white finally said the second sentence, but it was essentially no different from the first sentence. "Why?" Ninkei said gently. "Our two countries have been on good terms for generations, so it is natural for the Academy and the Black Ink Garden to join hands." The girl's third sentence should be the same question, and there was no change in her expression or tone. "Why?" Ninkei looked at her for a long time and finally gave up. He used his eyes to indicate Zhuozhihua to take Catgirl away. When there were only two of them on the spot, he seriously explained, "The Divine Hall is interested in the wilderness and the desolate man, and the Tang Empire is also interested in these. In this matter, the Academy should make its own voice." The girl asked expressionlessly, "Then why do you hide your identity?" Ninkei helplessly explained, "Because the Academy just wants to take a look. Besides, I am a golden secret agent of the Imperial Court. Secret agents, of course, have to do things in secret." The second half of the sentence was obviously nonsense, but for some reason, it seemed that this nonsense made the girl in white believe his words. Her slender and slightly sparse eyelashes fluttered, and she continued to ask, "What benefits do we have?" "I represent the Academy. Whether it is the Divine Hall or the Yueluan Kingdom, if they want to bully you, they will more or less have scruples." The girl slowly shook her head and said, "If you hide your identity, there will be no scruples." After thinking for a moment, Ninkei looked into her eyes and said, "If we are really in a desperate situation, I will naturally not continue to hide my identity. I believe that with the self-esteem of the Black Ink Garden, they will only need my help at that time." The girl slowly moved her eyes away, looking at the trees by the lake or the thin ice on the lake, and said, "Why should I trust you?" Ning Ke answered, "The academy is trustworthy." The girl turned back, quietly looked at his chest, and said, "Okay, how should I address you, girl?" Emo Shanshan. Emo Shanshan from Mogan Mountain. Ning Ke thought that the mountain behind the black ink garden was called Mogan Mountain. If the ink was dry, how could the master of calligrapher, Lord Wong, right? Wouldn't the famous calligraphy addict cry? Academy Zhong. For some reason, he did not want the name Zhong Dajuan to come out from the thin lips of the girl in white. He added, "I am the 13th. You can call me 13. The girl Emo Shanshan took a step forward, very close to him, and slightly squinted at his face. Ning Ke looked at the beautiful little face close to him and felt very embarrassed. Looking at the slightest expression of the other party, he was sure that he really did not know who he was. The girl Emo Shanshan nodded, patted his shoulder like an elder, and then turned to leave. He did not know whether she was satisfied or not. There are many first times in this book, Jiang Yi. This chapter is the first time that I try to describe the appearance of a character directly and intuitively. My ability to describe people and things has always been extremely poor. This time I stole a trick, so it is not difficult. I will try to do this more in the future. Finally, today I write it again. Long sigh. Please vote for me. We are still first. We are very awesome. The more awesome we are, the better. Good night. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 206. Emo Shanshan was both satisfied and dissatisfied. She was satisfied that Ning Ke didn't know her. Then there would be less noise and trouble. She was dissatisfied that Ning Ke didn't know her, so she had to overturn some of her original ideas. Because of some conflicting feelings, she didn't know what to say. She had to imitate her master's usual behavior, gently patting his shoulder, and then turned away. Looking at her back, Ning Ke thought that this girl from Black Ink Garden was really proud and indifferent to the extreme. Noticing his expression, Cat Girl was worried that he would misunderstand her senior sister and be unhappy. However, it was not convenient for her to explain for her senior sister, so she could only snort angrily and leave. I don't doubt Senior Brother Zhong's identity as a student of the academy. The other party is from the Chong, an academy, so there should be no problem. But Senior Brother Zhong is a Tang. He has countless ways to enter the wilderness. He can go with the Yin army or the Tang Imperial Court's envoy, but he has to hide his identity and follow us into the wilderness. Zhuo Jihua looked at Emo Shanshan beside her by the fire at night. She slightly frowned and said in a low voice, "No matter how he explained to you before, and how many shadows of the Tang Imperial Court and the Academy are behind this, it must be a big deal. The Great River Kingdom is weak, and I'm afraid it will be difficult for them to get out of such a big deal." Cat Girl shook her head and said, "What are you afraid of? It must be good to go into the wilderness with the Academy. Even if it will bring us trouble, we have the same amulet." Zhuo Jihua smiled helplessly and rubbed the girl's head. She thought that although the two countries had been on good terms for generations, if it was really a dispute between the Tang Empire and the Divine Hall as she imagined, the amulet might become a fatal amulet. Emo Shanshan, who had been listening quietly, said at this time, "Let him follow my carriage." Hearing this, Cat Girl gently clapped her hands and smiled. She looked at Zhuo Jihua and comforted her. "Senior sister, what are you afraid of? Even if Senior Brother Zhong is a master of the second floor of the academy, he won't mess around, right?" Emo Shanshan said softly, "He is not a student of the second floor. It's really a pity." Cat Girl asked in surprise, "Senior sister, how do you know?" Emo Shanshan looked at the dancing flames on the fire and seemed to be looking further away. She said, "If he is a student of the second floor of the academy, how can he not know my name?" That captain had once questioned how Ning Ke, as a student of the second floor, did not know the secret of the 7 tones of arcane. Now Emo Shanshan had also expelled him from the second floor of the academy because of his ignorance. If Ning Ke knew this, he would probably be depressed that he only knew how to cultivate in the back mountain of the academy and forgot to ask about these things. The next day, Ning Ke rode the big black horse to the bank of the Blue Lake. The heavy luggage was placed on both sides of the horse's back, making the big black horse shake its head and breathe out hot air. It seemed extremely dissatisfied, but it did not seem to be exhausted. He changed into an ordinary disciple's uniform of black ink garden and put on a bamboo hat to cover most of his face. Ninkei was still not satisfied, so he took out the mask that Sang Sang sewed by herself from his luggage and put on carefully. Mo Shanshan walked out from behind the yellow cloth. Today she did not wear the plain white dress, nor did she wear the wide blue belt around her waist. Like other girls from the Great River Kingdom, she wore a plain wide skirt and a bamboo hat with a veil hanging on the top of her head. Her beautiful eyebrows and eyes were all hidden behind the veil and could not be seen clearly. Both of them wished they could change their faces and make themselves the most inconspicuous. However, they had seen each other's true faces, so they suddenly found that the other had the same idea as them. They could not help but feel a little strange. The two looked at each other and did not speak. Then they brushed past each other. At that moment, Ninkei noticed that the girl's gaze hidden behind the veil did not completely fall on him. He could not help but frown, thinking that she actually wanted to show her disdain to him through the veil. He snorted in his heart and thought that even Prince Longqing was not his opponent in pretending to be lonely and indifferent. "You're such a good young girl. Don't even think of using this kind of gaze to hit me." After the disciples of Black Ink Garden finished organizing their troops, they marched towards the east and came to the side of the coalition camp. From the logistics department, they received the rations from the Central Plains to assist the left king's palace. The people of the Central Plains Coalition Army and the Yuelan Kingdom were very clear that the real difficulties and dangers would appear after entering the wilderness. Therefore, they did not encounter any twists and turns or any difficulties. 200 yin cavalries, more than 100 civilian workers who were driving the carriages, and a dozen disciples of Black Ink Garden from the Great River Kingdom left the frontier fortress in such a simple manner. Accompanied by the winter wind and the fake morning sun, they walked into the cold and vast wilderness. The yin cavalries escorting the grain team moved forward silently. The civilian workers who were driving the grain carriages looked uneasy or numb. The disciples of Black Ink Garden spread out to guard the surroundings. Other than the grain carriages, there were also 2 horse carriages that belonged to Black Ink Garden. Mo Shanshan was in one of the carriages, while Ninkei rode on the big black horse and followed closely behind. After traveling for more than 10 miles, the military camp behind them had long disappeared. He took off the conical hat on his head and looked at the snow that had accumulated in the withered yellow grass. Hearing the shrill cry of an eagle that came from somewhere, his eyes that were exposed outside the mask had a gleam of joy. He had not seen such a familiar scenery for a long time. Even the slight pain caused by the cold air entering his lungs made him feel as if he had returned home. For the next few days, there was nothing much to be done. The troop that was moving slowly on the wilderness could also drag out a large amount of dry dust. It was quite imposing. They did not encounter any blind horse bandits or wandering soldiers, nor did they encounter any strange things. Since the Divine Hall had assigned such a difficult task to the Black Ink Garden, they had intended to make things difficult for them. On the surface, they had done it well. The highest authority of the grain delivery team was also given to the Black Ink Garden. The 200 yin cavalries and grain wagons had to listen to the orders of these girls. When Commander Ninkei came to the side of the horse carriage and said a few words to Mo Shanshan through the window, the originally arranged yin army guide was officially laid off. The route of the troops, the choice of camp, and the arrangement of time were all decided by him. Under his command, the troops walked strictly along the surrounding hills of the Kidney Sea. Even though they could not find water every day, at least they could ensure an adequate supply of firewood. The troops set up camp very early every day. Just after noon, Ninkei requested to find a campsite and began to prepare to rest. The leader of the yin cavalries once raised an objection. He thought that the distance they traveled each day was too short. According to the current speed, it would be too late by the time the grain team reached the palace. It was not a big deal if the tribes and herdsmen starved to death, but if it affected the negotiation between the Divine Hall and the palace, it would be a real problem. The girls from the Great River Kingdom did not care about the leader's objection. In their opinion, since the Hill Master had decided to let the senior brother of the academy take charge, they should just listen to him. There was no need to say so much. As long as they could enter the wilderness safely and return happily, they did not care whether the Divine Hall would be angry or not. Even though it was winter in the wilderness, it was not too cold yet. The withered grass, barnyard branches, and snow along the way looked boring, but to these girls from the south, it was still a fresh journey. Even though Ning K had never been to the wilderness east of Min Mountain, this kind of scenery and this kind of journey were not fresh at all. He had done it countless times, such as giving directions, setting up camp, feeling the wind direction, and looking at animal dung. Most of the time, he rode the big black horse slowly and freely. The big black horse's bridle was specially made, so it could freely lower its head and nibble the grass while walking. His body and soul were also specially made. In this silent and boring journey, he calmly felt the cold heaven and earth, looking for the inspiration to break the realm. Occasionally, he would take Catgirl to shoot a few gazelles, improving the lives of others. What a beautiful winter scenery of the wilderness. What a beautiful sightseeing trip in the wilderness. Before and after Ning K entered the wilderness disguised as a disciple of the Black Ink Garden, there were many powerhouses from the Central Plains who entered this mysterious and difficult territory. Among these powerhouses, there were powerhouses from the border army of the Tang Empire, monks from the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom, men from the Sword Garret of the South Jin Kingdom, and executioners from the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall who were known for being cold-blooded and serious. Prince Longqing was naturally the best of these powerhouses. At this moment, no one knew where he was standing in the wilderness, what scenery he was looking at, and what kind of thoughts he was thinking about. But not many people knew that the real ruler of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall, the powerhouse who suppressed Prince Longqing to the point that he could hardly breathe, had already received the order of the Great Divine Priest of Judgment and entered the wilderness alone a few months ago. As the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, who was recognized as the most diligent and powerful among the 3 addicts in the world, was now standing on the top of a meadow outside the white cloth of the Left King's palace, looking at the night sky in the north with no expression. No one knew what she was thinking at this time, but it must be that she disdained to think about the whereabouts of Prince Longqing and his subordinates. Let's go back a few months to the scene when she just left the Peach Mountain of West Hill. Her red dress floated out of the magnificent Taoism temple like a gorgeous cloud of fire. The Great Divine Priest of Judgment sat indifferently on the throne carved from the whole piece of South Sea black jade. He slowly moved his eyes back from the bead curtain, closed his eyes, and whispered, "How was the Great Divine Priest of Light now?" The priest standing respectfully below the throne heard the words "Great Divine Priest of Light," and his body suddenly stiffened. He lowered his head and replied, "As usual, he recites the doctrines and classics every day. It seems there is nothing unusual." The Peach Mountain of West Hill was also known as the Divine Mountain. On the south side of the mountain facing the sun, thousands of pink peach trees bloomed. The Taoism temple hidden between the peach trees grew higher and higher, appearing extremely magnificent and solemn. On the other side of the mountain was a precipitous cliff. The smooth boulder looked as if it had been carved out by a god. There were almost no cracks or soil. Not to mention peach blossoms. Even a weed could not survive on it. Even weeds with the most stubborn vitality could not stand firm on the rock walls, but humans could. Countless years ago, the most devout believers of Haotian Taoism, under the inspiration of fanatical worship, used the most primitive tools and the most primitive methods, and forcibly dug dozens of steep stone paths through the cliff with their own hands. In the process of building these stone paths, countless people fell off the cliff, and their corpses were hard to find. But in the end, the believers still did what they wanted to do. This was probably the real reason why human beings were superior to all things in the world. The middle-aged priest walked slowly on the steep stone path. The huge cliff seemed to be like the collapse of the sky. It seemed to give people a huge pressure. Even in front of the throne of the Great Divine Priest of Judgment, he could still stand a little straight, but he completely bent down on the stone path, almost like an ant crawling on the stone path. Walking along the steep stone path along the huge zigzag for a long time, the middle-aged priest finally walked to the depths of the cliff behind the Peach Mountain. This place had been surrounded by clouds all day long. There was no sunlight all day long, and it was difficult to see 5 fingers. He could only feel the wetness around him and the sound of water coming from somewhere. There was a door in the depths of the fog. The middle-aged priest stood in front of the door silently for a moment, and then pushed the door open and entered. Behind the door was a gloomy world. A faint smell of blood reverberated in the dry passage. The dim yellow light shone on the iron wall, adding a strange and heavy feeling to the complicated and beautiful fu lines on the wall. This was the U prison, a place that millions of Haotian believers had never heard of. This place was responsible for detaining the remnants of the devil's doctrine and sinners who were judged as heretics by the West Hill Divine Palace. Only those sinners who were so sinful that even burning could not cleanse their filth were qualified to be locked up here. Haotian Taoism had been established on the Peach Mountain for many years. In this long time, none of the sinners who were locked up in the U prison had ever been able to escape. This was because those who were powerful enough to escape from U prison would not be captured alive by the Divine Hall. If they could not escape, they would never be able to escape. They could only live in the darkness and isolation from Haotian, painfully and helplessly for the rest of their lives. The middle-aged priest walked silently in the dim passage with his head down. He walked for a long time, but the passage seemed endless. It was not until the passage seemed to pass through the entire holy mountain that a wooden fence appeared. This wooden fence looked ordinary and was not made of any precious wood. There was no fu written by a divine talisman master on it. The gap between the wooden bars was very wide enough for a person to walk out. However, it was precisely this wooden fence that imprisoned a certain someone for 14 years. The middle-aged priest lifted his robe and knelt in front of the wooden fence. He kowtowed 3 times to the old man with withered hair behind the fence and said with a trembling voice, "Greetings, great divine priest." The old man behind the fence was reading a Haotian scripture in his hand. He turned around when he heard the voice. The old man's cheeks were very thin, and his expression was peaceful. His deep eye sockets were enshrouded with holy light. The light was so peaceful and pure, without any impurities or filth. It was as if it could see through everything in the world and see the darkness between the appearance and the heart of everyone. It was incomparably bright. I don't know if I have time to write it tomorrow. If there is no annual leave announcement, I will try to write one more chapter before I go home. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 207. Haotian was the supreme and the only faith in this world. Countless believers in the world devoutly worshipped the Haotian Taoism temples all over the world with their spirit and money. The Divine Hall located in the Peach Mountain of West Hill was the supreme center that influenced and even controlled these temples and the secular imperial power. The West Hill Divine Palace was led by the Hierarch Lord, and the affairs of the Haotian Taoism were managed by 3 great divine priests. These 3 great divine priests were extremely powerful and dignified, so they were called great gods. The 3 gods were the great divine priest of revelation, the great divine priest of judgment, and the great divine priest of light. Among them, the great divine priest of judgment was in charge of adjudicating heresy and arresting the remnants of the devil's doctrine. There were countless strong men under his command. He was the most powerful and had the most power on the surface. The great divine priest of revelation was in charge of comprehending the will of Haotian. He edited the classics and controlled all the Taoist temples in the world with the 7-fun calligraphy. He had a great influence in the secular world. The great divine priest of light was the most special existence among the 3 gods. He did not have specific distribution of Haotian Taoism's affairs, but he had the power to touch all the affairs of Haotian Taoism. That was because anyone who could become the great divine priest of light must be the most proficient in the doctrine of the Divine Hall, with the strongest belief and the most sensitive to the darkness of the world. 1,000 years ago, the great divine priest of light brought a certain tomes of arcane into the wilderness to preach. It could be said that he bore the most arduous and important historical mission of Haotian Taoism. One could imagine his status. No one knew why the great divine priest of light gave up Haotian's divine favor and created his own sect. He created a devil's doctrine in the world and fought against Haotian Taoism until today. Even though it was severely suppressed by the West Hill Divine Palace, it was still not defeated. One could imagine how powerful it was. The successive great divine priests of light of the West Hill Divine Palace were all great figures. Therefore, although there was no ranking within the Divine Hall, the great divine priest of light was the head of the three gods, just below the hierarch. Over the years, there were occasionally letters of authorization issued in the name of the three divine priests of West Hill. However, no one outside of Peach Mountain knew that the respected great divine priest of light was imprisoned by the Divine Hall in the secluded prison at the foot of Peach Mountain. Moreover, he had been imprisoned for 14 years. The middle-aged priest kneeling in front of the wooden fence could hardly suppress the excitement in his heart. Over the years, he was the only one in the world who often saw the old man behind the wooden fence, but every time he saw him, he was as excited as the first time he saw the old man. Now, he was the most trusted subordinate of the great divine priest of judgment. Even the two priests, Yi Hongyu and Prince Long Qing, would not underestimate him. However, no matter how high his status was, as long as he walked into the Dimyu prison and came to the wooden fence, he felt as if he was still the young man who had just come to Peach Mountain from the Song Taoist Temple in the East Sea, and the old man behind the fence was still the high status and beloved great divine priest of light. The middle-aged priest believed in Hao Yin and yearned for the light. He was willing and only willing to devote all his love and reverence to the old man who had guided him onto the bright path, even at the cost of his life and soul. The old man looked at the middle-aged divine priest calmly. The wrinkles on his face were as dense as the wood grain on the fence. The expression on his face was extremely gentle. There was no trace of the wisdom and majesty of the great divine priest of light in the past. The middle-aged priest touched his forehead to the ground and said softly, "The great divine priest of judgment asked, so I came to see you." The old man said, "Even if you don't come to see me, I still want to see you." The middle-aged priest was shocked and said in a trembling voice, "Great divine priest, what did you see?" The old man slowly turned around and looked out from the tiny glass hole in the room. Outside the hole was a deep fog, and no sunlight could be seen, but he knew that it was the north. The holy light in the old man's sunken eye sockets gradually dissipated. The black pupil was strangely enlarged and occupied the entire eyeball, looking like a transparent black jade without a speck of dust. I saw the shadow of a night appear in Chong and City. Hearing this, the middle-aged priest who was kneeling outside the wooden fence trembled. The great divine priest of light, who had been imprisoned for many years, was still the great divine priest of light. Every word he said naturally had its own reason. For the middle-aged divine priest, there was almost no difference from the will of Hao Yin. The great divine priest of light did not have the ability to predict the operation of all things in the world. That was the God-given ability of the great divine priest of revelation. But as a priest with the purest and firmest Taoist heart and light in every hair and drop of blood, he had a very special ability to see the real darkness of the world. Many years ago, he once saw the shadow of the night floating from the wilderness to the Tang Empire. It was because he firmly believed in this that the West Hill Divine Palace did so many things in that powerful empire in the north at all costs. However, it was very strange that because of that incident, he, who had a high position in the Divine Hall, was instantly beaten down to the dust. Facing the wrath of the Hierarch Lord, especially the gaze of the Taoist in indigo, as powerful as he was and as intelligent as he was, he could not do anything to resist. Thus, he became an unknown prisoner in the foothills of Peach Mountain. The middle-aged priest asked for instructions in a trembling voice. This matter should be reported to the great divine priest of judgment. No, the Hierarch Lord. The old man looked at him with a smile and shook his head, saying, "This hall," with a faint sigh. The dust on the fence flew up. In the temple at the back of the hall, it has already fallen and decayed. The great divine priest of light, who had been imprisoned for many years for no reason, had the right to coldly criticize the divine hall and even the Taoist temple. However, although the middle-aged priest respected him, he did not dare to reply. He raised his head and, after a moment of confusion, he could not hide his excitement and said in a trembling voice, "Are you leaving?" The old man looked at him quietly. His sunken eye sockets had returned to their original state, and the holy radiance made his eyes look indifferent and hollow. His dry lips trembled slightly, and he said emotionlessly, "You will die. Many people will die. There are many people in the divine hall, like me, who are willing to give up their lives." The middle-aged priest did not hesitate and said firmly, "For the light to come to the world." After being imprisoned for 14 years, he finally decided to escape the prison of the divine hall because of the darkness he saw. The old man quietly looked at the middle-aged priest who was kneeling outside the fence. It was as if he was seeing the young Taoist priest whose eyes were full of awe and worship many years ago. The wrinkles on his face became deeper and deeper, filled with compassion and compassion. One night, the old man got up and walked to the row of seemingly loose and low wooden fences. He quietly looked at the fence and looked at it for a long time, which he had accompanied for 5,000 days and nights. Then he said one sentence: "I have no confinement in my heart. How can a confinement stop me? My Taoist heart is bright. How can the light stop me?" After saying this, the old man reached out and pushed the wooden fence. His action was ordinary and casual, as if he was not trying to get rid of the years of confinement, but just wanted to leave home and push open the creaking wooden door. The old man's fingers touched the wooden fence. The wooden fence silently broke into powder and turned into countless shining dust particles that drifted everywhere. Then, like a group of fireflies, they drilled out of the small stone hole. The great divine priest of judgment, who was quietly sitting on the South Sea seat of heavenly black jade with his hand supporting his chin, suddenly stiffened. Two tiny specks of light suddenly appeared in his majestic eyes that were as deep as the sea. Puff! Thick blood spurted from his lips and dripped on the dark red divine robe. The fireflies drilled out of the small stone hole and entered the night fog. Like pouring oil into a fire, they ignited everything around them, especially the tiny particles in the haze. The dark valley that had never seen light suddenly burned. This kind of burning had no heat or destructive power, only brightness. The burning mountain fog instantly spread up to the south of Peach Mountain and among the Taoist temples. In the deep night, the whole Peach Mountain was burning, especially the divine hall of light, in which Taoist chanting echoed, solemn and compassionate, shining. At the highest point of Peach Mountain, there was a pure white divine hall. A thunder-like roar sounded in the divine hall. With the thunder-like roar, the invisible flame between Peach Mountain was gradually extinguished. The roar in the highest divine hall gradually became lower. The ending sound was lingering. The ending sound was faint. There was an island far away in the southeast. The storm in this ocean was more terrible than in the storm sea. No fishing boats or merchant ships had ever come here. There had never been human footprints on this island before. A skinny Taoist, dressed in green, stood on a high reef. The terrible waves kept hitting the bottom of the reef, making a thunder-like sound. The island was shaking, but he seemed to feel nothing. The Taoist in indigo quietly looked at the depths of the ocean, watching the hot fog that was evaporated by the lava of the underwater volcano. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and turned his head to look at the distant land that he could not see. After a long time, the Taoist in indigo sighed and shook his head. That night, 14 divine priests in Peach Mountain turned into ashes in the light. That night, a total of 300 people from the Divine Hall of Light were executed. That night, the great divine priest of light, who had been imprisoned for 14 years, successfully escaped from the West Hill Divine Palace. He was the first prisoner in history to leave the prison behind Peach Mountain alive. Dusk was the warmest time in the wilderness in winter. The red sunset hanging over the long grass in the distance emitted the last light of the day. Although it could not melt the snow, it could add some redness to the cheeks of travelers. The sound of arrows whistling and heavy objects falling sounded in the wilderness. People in the camp heard Cat Girl's surprised shout from afar. "Senior brother, your archery is so good." Someone went to clean up the prey. Ninkei fed the big black horse and was ready to rest for a while. When he passed by the carriage, he found Imo Shanshan beside the window, concentrating on writing in the last afterglow. "Be careful of hurting your eyes." He stood beside the window and said kindly. Imo Shanshan looked up at him coldly, as if he was air. Ning Ke had been in the wilderness for some days and found that the girl was so proud that she never looked at him directly. He was a little unhappy and thought that he did not even care about the pride of the Tang princess. How could he be defeated by her? So he did not bother to look at her directly. He leaned against the window and squinted to see her writing. His eyes did not fall on the paper, but on her face. He found that her slightly round face was full of concentration and forgetfulness. Ning Ke agreed that she was the most beautiful when she was serious. Once he picked up the brush, he often forgot everything around him. So when he saw the girl concentrating on writing calligraphy, his impression of her inevitably improved. I didn't know that you were a guy who was obsessed with books. Your writing is quite similar to my style. The young men of the Great River Kingdom were doing physical work, putting up tents and nailing stakes. Zhuozhihua and other female disciples were piling firewood to make a fire and cooking. Hearing Ning Ke's comments, they did not know why they laughed. They covered their mouths and looked at Ning Ke, but did not say why they laughed. Ning Ke was a little embarrassed. To cover up this embarrassment, he looked up at the sky and found that a few grain-sized stars appeared on the edge of the wilderness, looking at the sunset across the sky. He subconsciously sighed. There is still no moon. Inside the window, Emo Shanshan put down the brush on the inkstone and followed his gaze. She asked dully, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Ning Ke was slightly startled and thought of something. A smile gradually appeared on his cheeks. Emo Shanshan looked at his side face through the window. The breeze on the wilderness blew his hair, and a lovely little dimple vaguely appeared. She suddenly found that this guy's smile at this time was so sincere and sincere. Suddenly, Ning Ke put his palm on the window, and his body swept up and disappeared. A light sound came from the top of the horse carriage. Emo Shanshan looked up and did not understand what it meant. In the wind of the wilderness, Ning Ke stood on the top of the horse carriage and looked at the smoke gradually rising under the round sunset in the distance. He gradually frowned and put his hand between his lips to blow a sharp whistle. The camp suddenly became quiet, and the war horses began to stir. Accompanied by the setting sun, Sang Sang ate noodles with fried eggs alone with relish. There was not a single green onion in the noodles because she did not like to eat green onion. The reason why she used to put green onion was that someone liked it. She put on Shinjinji Cosmetics Store's powder in front of the mirror alone, and there would not be someone who always laughed at her. She slept alone, rolling from left to right and from right to left. The bed seemed much bigger. On the bed, she kicked her legs and stretched her arms as she wanted. She no longer worried about who she would kick or hit. Living alone in Chang and city was very comfortable, but also very uncomfortable. Sang Sang lay on the bed and looked at the tree outside the window. She looked at the stars and the leaves and wondered why there was still no moon. What was the moon that the young master mentioned? Where was the young master at this time? Maybe because the bed suddenly became bigger and she was not used to it, Sang Sang did not sleep well all night like the previous days. She tossed and turned until dawn. She got up with a yawn and rubbed her face. She pushed the door open and went to the alley to buy a bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup. Then she sat on the threshold of the old brush pen shop. In the bright light of the early morning, she ate alone, tasteless. It was noisy at Yangwan, the southernmost part of the Tang Empire. Countless caravans were waiting to enter the country. There was an ordinary horse carriage lined up according to the rules. In the carriage, there was an old man with withered hair and deep eyes resting. He opened his eyes and looked to the distant Chang and city in the north. His eyes were full of gentle and dignified light. Corrected a small mistake. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 208. The Southern Gate Temple at the foot of the imperial city was quiet, even a little lonely. Taoists and nuns walked quietly, occasionally looking up at the young Taoist standing outside the temple, and then quickly lowering their heads. The young Taoist was holding a yellow umbrella under his arm, and his face was calm and gentle. He was Ming-Chi, the first disciple of the Nation Master of Tang. Everyone in the Southern Gate Temple knew that Ming-Chi was a gentle and kind person. However, for someone of his status, to personally guard the door One could imagine how important the conversation in the temple was. No one dared to make a sound and disturb him. Deep in the temple, there were two beautiful cotton cushions on the black wooden board. Nation Master Li Qingshan looked at Master Yin Sei and said slowly, "Senior brother, that person should be coming to Chang'an in front of the emperor and his respected senior brother." Li Qingshan would habitually return to his playful appearance. However, today's expression was extremely serious, and there was a hint of serious inquiry on his face. Master Yin Sei took a deep look at him, and there was no usual wretchedness in his deep-set eyes, but some hidden sadness. He said indifferently, "It was not easy for the great divine priest to escape from that dark place. Why does he come to Chang'an? Who is he looking for? Or is he courting death?" Li Qingshan smiled bitterly and said, "The great divine priest of light of the divine hall, the second most powerful person in Peach Mountain. Such a person, even if he comes to Chang and to court death, he will surely shock the whole world." After a moment of silence, Master Yin Sei said, "The reason, I want to know why he comes." Li Qingshan took out a very thin letter from his arms and put it on the black floor. He said, "According to the speculation of the Hierarch Lord, it should be related to the thing that happened 14 years ago." Master Yin Sei slightly frowned and did not continue this topic. It seemed that even the two brothers did not want to talk about the thing that happened 14 years ago. What does this letter say? When he escaped from the Divine Hall, he used some means to easily push down the confinement. The great divine priest of judgment's Taoist heart was tied to the confinement, and he was badly injured by the backfire. Other divine priests and Taoists were also killed or injured. The temple has deduced that he will come to the empire, so they hope that we can capture or kill him at all costs. Li Qingshan noticed that his senior brother's eyes seemed to sink deeper after hearing this. He paused for a while and continued in a low voice. The letter also said that the great divine priest of revelation has led the masters of the Revelation Institute to the border ahead of time. As long as the imperial court agrees, they are willing to come to Chang and city to assist us. If it weren't for the fact that the judicial department was injured and most of its power was invested in the wilderness, the Revelation Institute wouldn't have to deal with this matter. However, I really didn't expect that my old friend, who had been imprisoned for so many years, was still alive. Instead, he seemed to be getting brighter and brighter. If it weren't for the current situation, with his ability, he might really be able to find the hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane for the Divine Hall. It was hard to tell whether Master Yin Sei was praising or sighing. Hearing the words, Tomes of Arcane, Li Qingshan slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "The wilderness is already in turmoil, but the hand scroll has been lost for a long time. Perhaps it is not even in the Desolate Man's tribe. Therefore, all parties only send the younger generation to try to find it. Senior brother, if your old friend reappears in the world, he will be much more important than the other side." Master Yin Sei shook his head and did not continue to discuss this issue. He asked, "What did His Majesty say at the beginning of His Majesty's ascension to the throne, when the imperial court was handing over to the man did such a thing in Chang'an City? His Majesty had long wanted him dead, but His Majesty's attitude was very clear. Even if he had to be killed, it could only be done by the empire itself. People from the Divine Hall were absolutely not allowed to enter the country and intervene." Li Qingshan looked at Master Yin Sei and said after a moment of silence, "Senior brother, you were very close to him at that time. You'd better leave this matter to me." Master Yin Sei shook his head and said expressionlessly, "Since it is a matter of Haotian Taoism, there is no reason to ask the Academy for help. But it is impossible to kill him with the power of the South School and the Imperial Center Administration." Li Qingshan said, "You can't judge things in the world only by impressions. Nothing is impossible." Master Yin Sei looked at him and said directly, "He used to be stronger than you. I believe he is stronger now than before." Li Qingshan smiled and said, "There were several very interesting stories recorded in the Huayang market of the South School. There was once a knowing destiny grand cultivator from the South Jin Kingdom who was traveling in the Great River Kingdom. As a result, he was killed by a rascal who was greedy for money. Master Yin Sei knew what he wanted to express and could not help frowning. Li Qingshan filled the teacup in front of his senior brother and said with a smile, "Although I am not talented, I also entered the knowing destiny realm many years ago. As the nation master of Tang, I am much stronger than that rascal." Above the great god's throne and under the firmament, Master Yin-sei looked at Li Qingshan and said slowly, "Junior brother, you have to remember this sentence. Anyone who can sit on the 3 great divine thrones in the Peach Mountain is qualified to stand under the firmament and overlook the secular world. In Haotian Taoism, the hierarch's position is the most noble. But in terms of Taoist heart cultivation, the hierarch is not necessarily much stronger than the 3 great divine thrones. But the person you are determined to kill is the great divine priest of light, who is known for his wisdom and Taoist heart." Li Qingshan smiled and said nothing more. Yin-sei knew that he did not really listen to these words. He could not help but sigh in the bottom of his heart. Thinking of the temperament of his old friend, he shook his head and said, "Do your best. If it is not easy, don't worry about it. All the fate, Hao Yin will arrange it." After Li Qingshan left, Master Yin-sei sat on the black wooden floor and was in a daze for a long time. His old and thin body looked more lonely against the cold pillars and floor. After a long time, he picked up the cold tea in front of him, dipped his finger in the tea, and wrote a word on the floor. Then he reached out his hand to the greasy and dirty Taoist robe and wiped it clean. Then he got up and left. The tea marks on the black wooden floor gradually disappeared, leaving only some very light water stains. If you looked carefully, you could vaguely see that it should be the word chaos. The old man's name was Wei Guangming. It was not because the old man was the great divine priest of light. In fact, more than 80 years ago, shortly after he was born, he got such a name when he was still a baby. After having this name for decades, he became the great divine priest of light and enjoyed the love and awe of millions of believers in the world. At that time, he understood that it was not only a drink and a peck, but also a name contained the will of heaven. If Hao Yin did not make a choice before he was born, how could his parents, who had been farmers for generations in the kingdom of Song, take out such a name? As the most respected great divine priest of light of Haotian Taoism, although the old man had been imprisoned for more than 10 years, there were still countless priests and powerhouses in the divine hall who were willing to sacrifice everything for him. There were also countless loyal subordinates in various Taoist temples in the world. Now that he had escaped from the fan prison at the foot of Peach Mountain, there were naturally people who helped him to come to Chong, and quietly. Getting off the carriage outside the great city, the old man walked along the deep and thick south gate. With drooping eyes and bent body, he slowly walked forward on the stone road. Suddenly, he seemed to feel something. The moment his right foot stepped on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, it slightly stiffened, and then he took it back and turned to the east. In the eyes of the passers-by, the old man was just a little inconvenient in his legs. They did not notice anything strange, nor did they know that at the moment when the old man's right foot was about to step on the street, the Vermilion Bird painting deeply engraved on the stone ground far away from the Vermilion Bird Avenue slowly opened its eyes. After a long time, the eyes of the Vermilion Bird painting slowly closed again. What a big array! The old man smiled and thought to himself as he walked slowly on the streets of the East City with his hands behind his back. After a while, the old man slowly walked beside a well in an alley. His indifferent and muddy eyes fell on a withered yellow leaf beside the well, and his brows gradually furrowed. The leaf was withered and yellow, and the veins were still there. It looked normal, but in the eyes of the old man, it was extremely unusual. In his eyes that could see all the darkness in the world, all the sceneries, street scenes, and life in the city seemed to be covered with a very thin layer of gauze. It did not cover the truth, but covered the fate that circulated between heaven and earth. The old man walked to the inconspicuous inn at the end of the alley with his hands behind his back. He shook his head and thought with emotion, what a big array. The big array of Chong and city had not been activated, but it had already covered the mystery of heaven, so that the old man could not see the dark shadow that he had been chasing for 14 years. However, the big array that made him admire and vigilant did not find out that he was a peerless powerhouse from the West Hill and did not give any warning. Because he was not the great divine priest of light now, He had restrained all his aura and ability, and even completely forgotten his Taoist heart. Now he was just a very ordinary skinny old man. He picked an ordinary inn to stay in. In the following days, he walked around Chang and city with his hands behind his back and his body hunched. He went to some ordinary places of interest, went to some ordinary markets, ordered some ordinary dishes, drank some ordinary fragrant jasmine, and listened to some ordinary folk songs. He spent some ordinary winter time like the most ordinary old man in Chang and city. Until the winter gradually came and the coldness became stronger, he went to buy an ordinary thick cotton-padded jacket. An ordinary old man did not need too much sleep. One morning, he got up when the sky was just bright. He wandered around casually and came across a stall selling hot and sour noodle slice soup. He smelled the fragrance and bought a bowl. When he left, someone knocked over the front of his cotton-padded jacket. A little girl came over with a food box and looked at the embarrassed old man expressionlessly. She pulled out a big towel from her sleeve like a magic trick and wiped the stain for him. Then she bought another bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup for him. The old man thanked her, but she shook her head, indicating that there was no need. Then she left with the food box. The old man was stunned. He handed the bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup in his hand to an old beggar from the Yin Kingdom who was thinner than him. Then he followed the little girl from a distance. The old man followed the little girl to an alley called Lin 47th Street and saw a small shop called Old Brush Pen Shop. He watched the little girl working hard in the shop for a whole day. The more the old man looked at her, the more he felt that the little girl was fresh and delightful. She was extremely clean from her appearance to her temperament, like an absolutely transparent glass bead. As long as there was a little sunshine, it would definitely shine brightly. The little girl's skin was a little dark, but it was also so clean and bright. So the great divine priest of light from West Hill stood in Lin 47th Street and couldn't help admiring her with joy. It's been a long time. Brothers and sisters, I'm tired. I've had 10 days off. I'm not qualified to complain, so I can only talk about my thoughts. There are some problems with the internet at home, so I haven't been online these days. I'm a few days late. I sincerely wish everyone a happy new year and a healthy family. Finally, a more sincere thank you. Finally, I must add that I haven't updated for 10 days. I just entered the upload password for half an hour. Half an hour. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 209. In the following days, the great divine priest of light, disguised as an ordinary old man in Chang, and went to the inn, ate, slept, enjoyed the scenery, drank tea, listened to music, and took a nap. Every day, he would stroll around the Lin 47th Street and see Sang Sang. He saw Sang Sang when he ate, slept, drank tea, listened to music, and took a nap. He went to see Sang Sang every day. After finding out the name of the skinny little handmaiden in the old brush pen shop, seeing Sang Sang became the most important part of his life. One day, the old man came to the Lin 47th Street again with 2 bags of osmanthus cakes from the Furong store. Seeing the little handmaiden being picked up by a royal carriage, he could not help but feel curious, but did not think much about it. Looking at the closed door of the old brush pen shop and not seeing Sang Sang's busy body, the old man felt something was missing and regretful. After standing there for a while, he suddenly remembered that he had forgotten the real purpose of coming to Chang'an. The shadow of the dark night had long disappeared from the old man's eyes. He did not know where that person was hiding in Chang, or whether he was still in Chang, and he had even completely forgotten about it these days. Standing on the gray wall of the Lin 47th Street, he thought of it and shook his head. He put the osmanthus cakes in front of the old brush pen shop and tightened his dirty, thick, cotton-padded jacket. Then he passed through the cobweb-like streets of the eastern city and came to a quiet mansion in the southern city. 2 large locust trees stood quietly at the entrance of the alley. Their leaves fluttered weakly in the winter wind. Compared to the lofty trees peeking out from the houses on both sides of the alley, they looked a little shabby. There were 2 mansions facing each other in the middle of the alley. The old man did not pay attention to the mansion on his right, but looked directly to his left. The broken seal had long been torn clean by the wind, leaving only some scraps of paper mixed in between the peeling pane of the wooden door. It looked extremely dilapidated. The old man stood quietly in front of the shabby mansion gate with his hands behind his back and his body bent. He looked at the remaining stone lion and the old mud that had accumulated behind the base of the stone lion. An indescribable emotion appeared in his sunken eyes. The old man stood there for a long time until a gust of winter wind blew in from the entrance of the alley and entered the collar of his thick cotton-padded jacket. He coughed a few times and his body bent even lower. A voice came along with the winter wind. The winter in Chang, and this year is much colder than before. The old man still stooped and replied, I haven't been to Chang'an City for many years, so I don't know what the winter in Chang'an City was like before. Then, he turned to look at the entrance of the alley. A man walked slowly from the entrance of the alley. His eyebrows were straight like a ruler, and his eyes were bright like a spring. He wore a cotton Taoist robe and a simple Taoist bun. He carried a long sword on his back and wore a pair of straw sandals. Every step he took was like a dragon or a tiger. The fallen leaves and mud in front of him seemed to be afraid of his power. They moved even though there was no wind and moved to the sides of the alley. It was the great Tang Empire's nation advisor, Li Qingshan. You can stay in Chang and for the next few years. Maybe you will have a deeper understanding of the winter here. Li Qingshan stopped and looked at the old man. He wanted to keep the guest. If he was a real guest, the Tang Empire would have good tea and wine to entertain him. If he came uninvited and had years of resentment, the so-called keep the guest meant something else. The old man looked at him quietly and slowly straightened up. His stooped and thin body suddenly became tall and mighty with a simple straightening movement. A sense of solemnity and wisdom gushed out. Facing the nation master of Tang, the old man was no longer the ordinary old man who drank tea, ate, and looked at Sang Sang. He was the great divine priest of light, the leader of the Sao school of Haotian Taoism, the nation master of Tang, and almost all the people's imagination about power could be given to Li Qingshan. No one had seen him in a wonderful state these years. Because of his extraordinary status, there was really nothing that he needed to do in person. But even the children playing in the streets of Chang and city knew that the nation master was naturally very powerful. Otherwise, how could he become the nation master? For people in the cultivation world, the nation master of Tang Li Qingshan was a master in the knowing destiny state. Once he made a move, he would definitely cause a storm. However, the old man in front of the dilapidated general's mansion was not an ordinary person. As the most respected great divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace, he still had countless loyal subordinates after being imprisoned for 14 years. Even the hierarch did not dare to kill him. Once he made a move, he caused chaos in the Divine Hall and was the first person in history to successfully escape from the U prison. The nation master of Tang was facing the great divine priest of light. No one knew who would win. The West Hill sent a letter saying that you are very powerful. My senior brother also said that you are very powerful. He even said that you may be more powerful than the hierarch. Looking at the great divine priest of light, Li Qingshan suddenly smiled and said, I know that because my mind is preoccupied with secular affairs, I can't keep my Taoist heart calm, so I always have some regrets in the realm. So if you're really stronger than me, I don't think it is difficult to accept, and I won't think it is a shame. The great divine priest of light said, after so many years of cultivation, if I still can't see through this, I will inevitably be a little stupid, so I can't see through you. Li Qingshan stopped smiling and said, You are different from the two great divine priests of judgment and revelation. Back then, my senior brother and I never saw a trace of ambition for power in you. You didn't even seem to have much interest in the glory of Haotian in the human world. You studied the scriptures hard. You saved people in trouble. You were compassionate, but not compassionate. You were indifferent, but not interested in indifference. You were almost a completely transparent or bright person. Li Qingshan's voice gradually became cold. He said, So I don't understand why you suddenly became such a person. You would do such a thing and become the first great divine priest of light to be imprisoned in the Divine Hall. I also don't understand why you still came to Chang and after escaping. What do you want to do? All things and laws in the world are determined by Haotian. Our position in the world has long been determined. My position is above the divine priest of light. My mission is to see the darkness. That's all. After a short pause, the great divine priest of light looked up at the messy sky behind the messy branches above the courtyard wall. A trace of compassionate smile appeared on his face. He continued to say, if everyone knew their position and mission, everything in the world would be much simpler. When I saw the darkness, it should have been purified by judgment. However, no one was willing to complete their mission, so I had to do more. He withdrew his gaze and looked at Li Qingshan. He said, whether you see it or not, the darkness is always there. But since I saw it, I really can't pretend that I didn't see it. Li Qingshan shook his head and said, if all things and laws in the world are determined by Hao Yin, then why do we still need to cultivate and seek? Where the darkness is, it will be purified by Hao Yin. You just need to complete your mission in your position. Why do you still need to do these things? If you could really know your position and mission, you should still be the great divine priest of light sitting on the divine throne and being worshipped by all people. How could you become a stray dog that everyone wants to kill? The great divine priest of light was silent. Li Qingshan looked at his old face and thought of the benevolent old man who painstakingly studied the scriptures in the divine hall many years ago. His heart was filled with mixed feelings of sympathy and disgust. He sighed and said, all the great divine priests of light are the most intelligent people in Haotian Taoism. But I don't know why the great divine priest of light is the most prone to problems. The more outstanding one is the more so. The one who preached in the wilderness more than 1,000 years ago, and the one who disappeared in the South Sea 600 years ago. You are also the same. Why? I often wonder if it's because people like you, who have great wisdom and perseverance, have great confidence that you insist that what you see is the truth, and that it's the only truth, so you walk further and further away from the real truth. Listening to these sincere words, the great divine priest of light was silent for a long time. He seemed to have some emotions, but after a moment, his expression became calm and indifferent. He said, what you see is what you see. What you see in the eyes of light is the objective existence of the world. Falsehood is also the truth. Hearing his words, Li Qingshan could not help but be slightly angry. He said in a low voice, but no one will think so except you. 14 years ago, you faked the hierarch's edict and let Li Peiyin and Xiahou do this. His Majesty was angry, and so was the hierarch. If you did not want to be the enemy of the whole world, how could the world treat you as its enemy? How could His Majesty and the hierarch think you should die at the same time? You are so virtuous and respected. How could you be locked up for so many years? The great divine priest of light said, I did not fake the edict of the chief monk. Li Qingshan slightly raised his eyebrows and said, you mean the hierarch used you as a scapegoat? The great divine priest of light's tone became calmer and calmer. He said, who has the guts to use me as a scapegoat? After a moment of silence, Li Qingshan said, but this thing was done by you after all. Yes. Have you ever considered the thoughts of His Majesty and the hierarch? What does the thoughts of the Tang Emperor and the chief monk have to do with me? The great divine priest of light's voice was as calm as the frozen surface of a lake in winter, smooth and without any ripples or traces, as if the disaster he had caused that shocked the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace was just a trivial matter. Li Qingshan looked at him coldly and asked, you came to Chang, and after getting out of trouble, have you not let go of that thing? The great divine priest of light was silent. Li Qingshan turned to look at the dilapidated general's mansion and sighed. So many innocent people have died in Chang, and just because of what you said back then. This general's mansion has deteriorated to this extent thanks to you. Are you still not satisfied? The great divine priest of light said expressionlessly, not satisfied. Li Qingshan pointed at the general's mansion and scolded harshly. All the people in the general's mansion are dead. What else are you dissatisfied with? The great divine priest of light shook his head and said, no, there is still one who is not dead. Li Qingshan's pupils shrank slightly, and he was extremely shocked. At that time, both the Divine Hall and the Tang Empire's princes and generals agreed to cooperate with me because no one wanted to see the son of Yama come to the world. However, after that, everyone thought that what I saw was fake. Your princes thought that I had bewitched them, and your emperor was extremely angry. So even though some people knew that there was still one person alive in this general's mansion, they were not willing to continue the investigation and even forbade talking about it. Why was I imprisoned for 14 years? Because I knew that the son of Yama was still in this world and was becoming more and more powerful. I wanted to continue looking for him, but those people did not believe in the son of Yama and his existence. If I continued to investigate, there would be a big problem between the West Hill and the Tang Empire. Then some people had to lock me up. He said slowly with a sad mood, Peach Mountain, the Tang Empire, the whole world has decayed. It is not that I want to be the enemy of the whole world, but the whole world is the companion of the dark night and the enemy of the light. I am the great divine priest of light. I am Wei Guangming. Then the whole world is my enemy. I don't want to use the name of chaos in Chang'an anymore. The name of this chapter is more relevant. This is really a big drama. There will be a volume called The Year of the Curtain, which is probably the third last volume. Recently, I have been at home in Hubei, so I can only keep the update like this for the time being. First, the quality is guaranteed, then the quantity is guaranteed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 210. In the previous chapters, I confused the Ming hand scroll with the Ri hand scroll. I will correct it when I get home. Sorry. Thank you for reminding me. Who were those people? Who didn't believe in the legend of the son of Yama? Who could change the divine hall's attitude? Who could make the Tang Empire wait quietly? Who could make the great divine priest of light fall into the dust with one word? Li Qingshan's body suddenly stiffened as the image of an old temple on a quiet mountain appeared in his mind. Many years ago, when the West Hill Divine Palace gave him the title of Great Divine Priest, he once went to the old temple. This was the only time in his life, but it was unforgettable. Thinking of this, he seemed to see the thin figure on the edge of the cliff again, and his whole body was slightly cold. The Great Divine Priest of Light said, I don't know what the Abbey Dean was thinking at that time. I respect him from the bottom of my heart, but I will still stick to my own ideas. Li Qingshan looked at his old cheeks in silence. Only then did he know that it was the Taoist in indigo who personally imprisoned him as the Great Divine Priest of Light. Then he thought of the Great Divine Priest of Light who could stick to his own ideas in front of the Taoist in indigo. He could not help but feel great admiration. Because I stick to it, I will not give up. The light in the Great Divine Priest of Light's eyes was calm and deep. He said slowly, during these years of being imprisoned in the back of Peach Mountain, I have never stopped looking at the world with this pair of eyes. One year, I even tried it once. Li Qingshan frowned and said, the Yin territory murder case? The Great Divine Priest of Light did not answer directly, but said indifferently, unfortunately, I still failed to kill that person. I clearly saw that the shadow of the night was still floating in the world, sometimes thick and sometimes faint, sometimes disappearing and sometimes appearing. But during these 2 years, the shadow became more and more solid, which means that person is becoming more and more powerful. Li Qingshan asked with a serious expression, who is the person you saw with your eyes? Is he in Chang'an? The Great Divine Priest of Light gave a very obscure answer. The eyes can only see his existence, but not his existence. One day, I saw him appear in Chang'an, so I was very anxious, so I wanted to come to Chang'an. Although he said that he was worried, the expression on the old man's face was still calm, without a hint of anxiety. Li Qingshan was silent for a long time, as if he was thinking about what the headmaster had said. Finally, he shook his head slowly but firmly and said, the legend is just a legend. No one has ever discovered the underworld. The headmaster has been traveling around the world for many years. I heard that the Abbey Dean is also traveling in the south. They must also be looking for the underworld. After so many years, even the two of them have not found the underworld, so it can't be real. If there is no netherworld, there will be no netherworld king. If there is no netherworld king, there will be no son of netherworld king. The Great Divine Priest of Light said, of course there is the underworld, so there is naturally Yama. Li Qingshan stared into his eyes through the winter wind in the alley and asked, where's the underworld? The Great Divine Priest of Light said calmly, I don't know. Li Qingshan asked. Then how can you conclude that there is an underworld? The great divine priest of light replied, because there is, so there is. Li Qingshan suddenly felt like he had returned to the fragrance workshop many years ago, when he met the crown prince who was more shameless than himself. Other than beating him up, there was no way for him to have a normal conversation. The great divine priest of light looked at his expression and smiled. He said, the Ming hand scroll has records about the underworld invasion and the existence of the acuteness Yama. But 1,000 years ago, the Ming hand scroll was taken to the wilderness by that ancestor and was lost. No one has ever seen it, so it was gradually forgotten and even became a legend. Li Qingshan frowned and said, but you haven't seen the Ming hand scroll either. It's true that I didn't have the opportunity to see the original Ming hand scroll. But don't forget, that ancestor and I are both great divine priests of light. Some records will always be passed down in an indescribable way. Li Qingshan looked at him and shook his head. He sighed and said, great divine priest, have you ever thought that just because of your own illusion and a legend, you gave up everything and became the enemy of the whole world? The great divine priest of light shook his head and said, with a bright Taoist heart, what you see is what you believe. Then you naturally have to believe what you see. As long as you believe, then the illusion is often true. After a moment of silence, Li Qingshan took a step forward. A very light airflow splashed up where his straw sandals landed. It was like a stone falling into a still lake, making circles of ripples. Only Hao Yin can see everything in the world and see all the truth with one glance. Although you sit on the great divine priest throne and are under the sky, you are a human, not a god, not even heaven. The great divine priest of light's gaze fell on Li Qingshan's right foot. There was no emotional fluctuation in his voice. He said indifferently, because I'm not a god or Hao Yin, so you don't believe me? Yes. Li Qingshan's right hand, that was exposed from his sleeve, was extremely delicate. It held nothing and trembled slightly, as if he was clutching a struggling dragon. Meanwhile, the sword in the sheath on his back thrummed like the dragon was about to emerge from its body. Even if you are a god, there is still a god-stunning array in Chang'an. The great divine priest of light shook his head and said, the god-stunning array will not be interested in an old man like me. Li Qingshan took another step forward. The long sword in the sheath roared louder and louder, and the grip of the dragon in his right hand became firmer. He looked at the old face of the great divine priest of light and said in a low voice, I know you will come here to see, so I'll let the south gate set up a Tianluo array around. I want to see if I can keep you here. No, the great divine priest of light said, even the confinement of judgment can't trap me, let alone the Tianluo array. Li Qingshan said, the Tianluo array is a divine array given by Hao Yin. Is it not comparable to the confinement of the great divine priest of judgment? The great divine priest of light replied, the confinement traps the heart, while the Tianluo traps the body. It is naturally more difficult for the heart to escape than the body. Li Qingshan was silent for a while and agreed with this judgment. He said, the god-stunning array will not be activated because of you. But if you want to escape, you must display all the aura of your state. At that time, the array will have a way to subdue you. The great divine priest of light said calmly, I'm just an ordinary old man in Chang'an. Li Qingshan said, because I am here, you can't always pretend to be an ordinary old man. The great divine priest of light looked at the master of Tang, who was slowly approaching him, and smiled. He said, Qingshan, you are a person with a great lucky chance. When you were young, you met the emperor of Tang and were respected in the secular world. Then you were chosen by the elder Taoists in the temple. You easily entered the knowing destiny state and were favored by the emperor. However, because of your good lucky chance, you have never experienced the great fear of life and death in your life. So how can you threaten me? Li Qingshan was so despised, but there was no anger on his face. He said with a smile, as I said before, if I am not your opponent, it is also a matter of course. So I never expect to keep you here by myself. The great divine priest of light's deep eye sockets became darker and darker, gradually turning into a pair of pure black gems. He looked at the slightest change of the chi of heaven and earth in the street and sensed the more intense breathing around him. He said indifferently, "I've said it before. Your luck is too good, your power is too great, but your experience is too little. When you first became the Imperial Preceptor, Liu Bai was determined to challenge you, but he was stopped by Yin Sei. You've never fought against a supreme expert in your life, so you can't understand. For people like you and me, the number of enemies doesn't mean much unless the number is so large that it can make the ground of the mortal world sink." As soon as he finished speaking, the withered leaves above the street fluttered again, and dozens of crossbowmen appeared in the streets and alleys. The sharp crossbows in their hands reflected the biting coldness, and the tightened crossbows clearly emitted the hidden powerful force. The cultivation powerhouses of the Imperial Center administration in brown official robes also gradually came over. In some rooms in the further marketplace, the array tactical master of the Tang Empire responsible for launching the encircling formation was constantly pouring psyche power into the formation eye. The hoofbeats sounded like thunder. The heavy armored black cavalry of the Tang Empire began to gather here at high speed. The huge weight made the ground of the long street tremble violently, as if it would sink at any time. Li Qingshan withdrew his eyes from the mottled wall of the general's mansion and looked at the divine priest of light expressionlessly. He said, "Although you are the divine priest, your body is still that of a mortal. You are so fragile. Today, I will let you die in front of the general's mansion. It is also to find some overdue light for the innocent people who died in the general's mansion." The great divine priest of light said, "I am the light." Li Qingshan said sarcastically, "I didn't expect that after being imprisoned for 14 years, you have become so conceited." The great divine priest of light replied calmly, "What you said makes sense. Conceit is against the law of the church. My expression is more accurate. I should say, since the headmaster of academy is not in Chang, and then I am the light." Li Qingshan was silent. Stepping into the street with the momentum of a dragon and a tiger, he, the master of Tang Nation, exchanged words with the great divine priest of light. The content was shocking, but the tone was calm, as if they were having a tea contest. All the killing and stubbornness were hidden in the picking of the spoon. What they tested was the Taoist heart, and what they competed was still the Taoist heart. After this conversation, it seemed that there was no winner or loser, but it could also be said that the great divine priest of light had won, so there was no need to talk anymore. The strong sound of the springs sounded, and the sharp crossbow arrows shot out like a dense rainstorm. The sound of the arrows tearing the air was so sharp that it hurt people's ears. They surrounded the body of the great divine priest of light from all directions, leaving no gap. Almost at the same time, the array tactical master of Tang hidden in the distant marketplace started the encircling array. On the street outside the general's mansion, the chi of heaven and earth changed dramatically. Countless chi turbulence turned into a primordial chi lock, forcibly locking all the space around the great divine priest of light. With a clear dragon's roar, the sword on Li Qingshan's back thrummed and vibrated. The sheath flew out like a bolt of lightning, turning into an azure dragon in the air and crossing half the street in a single moment. The dragon's roar rang out as it slammed into the divine body of Light's old face. This was a long-planned attack by the Tang Empire. Because the target was the horrible, great divine priest of light, they were well prepared. In addition to these powerful attacks in the street, there were many follow-up arrangements, and the opponent's response was very simple. Facing the rain of arrows, the encircling formation that locked the world, and the flying sword that had transformed into an azure dragon, the old man's deep and serene eyes emitted a straight ray of light, then a second ray, a third ray, 1,000 rays, 10,000 rays, countless rays. The great divine priest of light shone brightly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Dian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 211. The thick winter clouds over Chang and city blocked the sun behind it. However, a sun suddenly appeared in the streets outside the general's mansion in the southern city. The blazing light burst into the eyes of the great divine priest of light and instantly illuminated the dark world. The withered leaves, mottled walls, broken stone lions, and old steps were all covered with a layer of dazzling halo. It completely lost its original appearance and became incomparably holy. Dozens of elite crossbowmen, known for their perseverance, threw away the crossbows in their hands and covered their eyes. They screamed and fell to the ground. The flying crossbow arrows screamed even more miserably. They had already lost their direction in the blazing light. Faintly, the quivering crossbow tails could be seen everywhere on the trees and walls. The black-armored soldiers of the Tang Empire gathered on the street were in chaos. The well-trained warhorses seemed to have sensed the supreme power contained in the blazing white curtain of light in the alley. They neighed and bent their front hooves respectfully, kneeling on the ground in fear. God knows how many cavalrymen were knocked off their feet. The South School of Haotian Taoism array tactical masters hiding in the distant marketplace were even paler. Several people's clothes were covered with blood. They did not suffer from any backfire of the chi of heaven and earth. But because of the great confusion and fear in their sense of perception, the spiritual impact directly hurt their internal organs. The exquisite encircling tactical array, inherited from the West Hill Divine Palace, could not locate the target. They cultivated Haotian Taoism and poured the power of light into the encircling tactical master. But the great divine priest of light was full of light from his body to his heart, without any impurities. It was impossible to lock a pool of clear water with crystal-clear lake water. Further away on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, a breeze blew out of nowhere. The gravel on the Vermilion Bird, engraved deeply in the stone slabs, was blown everywhere by the wind. Tourists from various counties of the empire were blinded by the wind and blown by the gravel. They subconsciously lowered their heads to avoid it or rub their eyes with their hands. Even if they did not lower their heads or cover their eyes, they probably could not see that a very clear and faint shadow of the Vermilion Bird, almost invisible to the naked eye, rose from the stone carvings on the ground. It flapped its wings and rolled up the fallen leaves and gravel. In an instant, it flew around Chong and at an unimaginably terrifying speed. Unfortunately, the Vermilion Bird did not find any enemies in Chang'an. An angry roar came from the highest winter cloud. Li Qingshan stood at the front of the alleyway outside the general's estate silently. As he listened to the indignant cry from the cloud, he slowly opened his eyes and looked at the empty alleyway. His expression became even more stern. The azure dragon that was wandering in the alley let out a low, unwilling roar. It slowly withdrew its aura and returned to its scabbard. The Vermilion Bird failed to find any trace of that person, nor did all the spies scattered in Chong. The countless backup plans that the Tang Empire had set up were forced to an abrupt halt. The thick winter clouds above Chong and suddenly dispersed, revealing the long-awaited sun. The warm sunlight gently sprinkled down and shone on the thousands of mansions in the human world. It was everywhere. That person did not make a move, nor did he reveal the slightest hostility or battle intent. He only emitted his light will, and like the rays of the sun, it quietly faded away, leaving no trace. There is light everywhere in the world. How can you find light? Li Qingshan looked up at the light leaking through the winter clouds and murmured, "Above the god's throne, under the sky. Senior brother, I finally understand what you mean by that." In the small courtyard behind the house of Red Sleeves, Master Yin Sei stared at the swaying candlestick on the table. His wrinkled eyes trembled slightly, as if he was thinking about a very important decision. Dewdrop reclined in his arms. Her slender eyelashes trembled slightly, and her face was full of confusion. However, she did not dare to ask when she saw the solemn expression of the old Taoist. Why did he light the candlestick in the daytime? Could it be that this divine talisman master, whom no one in the empire dared to offend, actually had some strange interests after he refused to really drink water these days? Looking at the candle, tears gradually accumulating on the candlestick, Dewdrop's body was a little stiff. She thought that she had heard a lot of such interests, but she had never done it herself. She did not know whether the candle tears would hurt when falling on her body, or it was really interesting. She wanted to refuse, but she did not dare to say it out. Suddenly, the candlestick on the table suddenly shone brightly, illuminating the room. Dewdrop was startled and almost fell down from Yin Sei's legs. Master Yin Sei stared at the burning candlestick and narrowed his eyes for a long time. Then he rubbed Dewdrop's plump and tender buttocks lovingly and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "In the future, I have something to do, so I probably will not come here often. If there is something that your Miss Jin can't solve in the future, you can go to the South Gate to find my junior brother." Now Dewdrop already knew the real identity of this old Taoist, and naturally knew that the junior brother he mentioned was Li Qing-shan, the nation master of Tang. Suddenly hearing these words, she understood that she had found another extremely thick mountain in the future. She could not help but feel a little surprised, but then she felt infinite fear. She thought that why did these words sound a bit like that he was making arrangements for his death? There was no true love on the pleasure ground, not to mention the age and status gap between Yin Sei and Dewdrop was too big. However, somehow, when Dewdrop looked at the wretched face of the old Taoist, she actually saw some sadness and reluctance. She subconsciously reached out to grasp the collar of the old Taoist robe, completely forgetting that she usually hated the oil stains and dirt on this Taoist robe. An old man wearing a thick cotton-padded jacket full of dirt, with his hands clasped behind his stooped body, walked slowly in the streets of the eastern city. The cotton-padded jacket still gave off a very faint smell of hot and sour noodle slice soup. As previously said in the conversation with Li Qing-shan outside the general's mansion, as long as the headmaster of academy was not in Chang'an, he was the light, and the only thing he was afraid of was the big tactical array of Chang'an. However, he was not evil. He had a kind heart, and his Taoist heart was pure and bright. Even if what he did was unpardonable in the eyes of the whole world, he still believed that he was the light. As long as the big tactical array of Chang was not fully activated, how could the vermilion divine talisman, which arose from the light, find him? However, people who had cultivated to this state, even if they could not understand the deepest law of the flow of the chi of heaven and earth in the world, they had begun to have some kind of connection between man and nature, and could vaguely know what would appear in front of the river of time. The old man felt that he would die in Chang, and this feeling was getting stronger and stronger. He seemed to have seen the messengers of the underworld begin to dig a grave for him in Chang, but he did not know what would be written on the tombstone. The end of life was not necessarily a sad thing. However, just like Yin Sei had a nostalgia for the human world, he also had some regrets about it. Years ago, he had 1 foot over the threshold and saw the wonderful world over there, but was ruthlessly taken back by some existence. He was not reconciled to it, so he wanted to accept a successor before he left this world, and leave his mantle so that his successor could clearly see the world in the future on his behalf. It was difficult for a divine talisman master to have a real successor, and it was also difficult for the great divine priest of light to have a real successor. Yin Sei now had Ning Ke, so he had no regrets, but he did not. He even thought that he would not have one until the end of his life, until he came to Chang and came to Lin 47th Street and saw Sang Sang. The old man stood outside the threshold of the old brush pen shop, looking at the little handmaiden who was busy in the shop. He was full of admiration, joy, and satisfaction, and even moved to tears. He felt that although he had repeatedly disobeyed the will of Hao Ian in this life, at least in the last stage of his life, Hao Ian still mercifully gave him the most precious gift. There was no one in the world more suitable to be the successor of the great divine priest of light than this little girl, because there could not be a second person in this world who was cleaner than her, without a trace of impurity. The old man crossed the threshold and walked into the old brush pen shop. He bowed to the busy little girl and said, "Hello." Sang Sang turned around, put the big rag in her hand on the table, and answered, "Hello." These days, she had long noticed that this pitiful and lonely old man often appeared in the alley. Third Master Chi subordinates had even asked her if she wanted to drive this old man away. However, she thought that he was just an ordinary strange old man, so she rejected the suggestion. She was even too lazy to pay more attention to him. The old man asked, "Do you know the biggest difference between human beings and beasts?" Sang Sang did not think, directly shook her head and answered, "I don't know." Then she grabbed the rag and was ready to continue wiping the table. The old man sincerely said, "Can you try to think about it?" Sang Sang thought for a while this time and said, "Human beings are more beasts than beasts, so we are stronger than beasts, so we can eat beasts." Hearing this answer, the old man was obviously not mentally prepared and asked in surprise, "Why do you think so?" Sang Sang shook her head and said, I don't know. This is what young master told me when I was young." The old man sighed and said, "Your young master is also a wonderful person, either a great evil or a great good person." Sang Sang thought for a while and said, "Young master is young master." She did not finish her words, and she did not have the habit of finishing her words. If the old man could understand, then so be it. If not, then it was none of her business. In fact, her meaning was very clear. A son was a son, a mother was a mother, a brother was a brother, a husband was a husband, and a young master was a young master. For her, Ninkei was a separate existence, different from the definition of evil, good, man, woman, rich, and poor. After a moment of silence, the old man said, "In my opinion, the biggest difference between human beings and beasts is inheritance. Beasts do not hesitate to pass on their own life and death, but human beings want to pass on their spirit. The similarity is that this kind of inheritance contains a very strong desire, and they both want to leave a trace of themselves in the world for a longer time." After a short pause, the old man looked at the little girl's slightly dark cheeks and said solemnly, "If the inheritance represents the root of an aristocratic family or the orthodoxy, then this strong desire will even become some kind of heavy responsibility." Finally, the old man concluded, "This is the so-called future." Sang Sang opened her bright willow-shaped eyes and looked at the strange old man in front of her. After thinking for a long time, she thought she understood and asked seriously, "Do you want to find a wife and have children?" She looked up and down at the old man, judging his age, and said, "If you are sure that you can still have children, there are yin girls in the eastern city Ranyatsi. The price is not expensive, and they are easy to give birth to." The old man was in a trance and said, "I didn't mean that." Sang Sang was stunned for a while, and then she shook her head shyly and said, I can't give birth to children for others. I'm sure that this is the first time that I have fallen in love with the character I wrote, and it is only second to my love for my mother and my leader. I wish my leader a happy birthday. Besides, tomorrow is Saturday, and I have to rest. I am really lazy, cheap, and shameless." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 212. After a while, Sang Sang looked at the old man and said seriously, "If you only like domestic women and not yin women, I know some girls from brothels. But it will cost a lot if you want them to bear children for you." The old man was in a trance again. After a long silence, he finally woke up and said seriously, "I don't want to find a wife to bear children. I want to find a disciple to inherit my mantle." It was Sang Sang's turn to be in a trance. She thought, what does finding a disciple have to do with me? My bones are not unique, and my background is not strange. Although your cotton-padded jacket is indeed dirty, it seems that you have not begged these days. No matter how I look at it, you don't look like an otherworldly sublime being in the stories I heard from Ninkei when I was young. Do you want me to be your disciple? Or do you want me to find you a disciple? She asked seriously. The old man answered seriously, "I want you to be my disciple." Sang Sang decided to ignore him. She squatted down and began to wipe the table legs. The old man looked at the bright table leg, which was absolutely free of any stains, and remained silent. The old man didn't leave the old brush pen shop. He followed Sang Sang and watched her. He watched as Sang Sang wiped the tables and chairs, cleaned the non-existent dust, and repaired the door that had been repaired long ago. He watched as Sang Sang closed the door, fetched water from the well, washed the rice, prepared the vegetables, cooked the rice, and chopped the garlic. He watched as Sang Sang sat at the table and began to eat alone. Sang Sang didn't invite him to eat with her. Strangely, she didn't ask him to leave either. The old man looked at her through the window and said sympathetically, "Are you bored?" Sang Sang's hand holding the bowl slightly stiffened. She looked at the 3 vegetables on the white rice and nodded. Then she continued to chew the vegetables in her mouth, and her dark cheeks bulged slightly. After dinner, Sang Sang washed the dishes, face and feet, and prepared to sleep. Before going to bed, she took out a quilt and handed it to the old man who had been guarding in the courtyard. She said, "If there is no place to sleep, you can put the table together in front and sleep for the night." The old man felt the weight of the quilt and became more determined. He looked at the little girl and asked seriously, "Do you believe in lucky chance?" Sang Sang shook her head. Then she thought of their encounter many years ago and the life they had together. Her willowy eyes brightened and she nodded again. "I believe in fate." The old man said, "I believe that everyone is destined to meet some people and do some things. These things arranged by Hao Ian are fated chances." The old man's cloudy eyes gradually brightened. He looked at the night view of Chong and outside the small courtyard and said, after a moment of silence, "Many years ago, I saw the shadow of nightfall in this city. Once I saw it, it was like meeting. Since we've met, we can't be separated anymore. It's just that what I've seen isn't real, and what I've met isn't concrete. I only know that he exists, but I don't know where he is." Then I saw a man in Chong, and who was born with knowledge. I felt that this was wrong, because there should not be anyone in the world who was born with knowledge. So, my lucky chance with him began. My destiny with him is to see him and then kill him. After seeing him for 9 months, I tried to kill him, but I knew that I didn't kill him because he was still alive. I was the only person in the world who could clearly feel that he was still alive. It's just that since then, the opportunity has faded. Apart from the occasional time, I've never been able to see where he is. Until recently, I saw him again, so I came to find him and renew my lucky chance. The old man muttered the past like a devout, foolish woman sitting on the high threshold. Sang Sang listened in silence for a long time. Her willowy eyes occasionally brightened and then disappeared. Then she asked, "Find him. What will you do?" The old man said, "Kill him." Sang Sang asked, "If you're such a great person, why didn't you kill him back then?" "Because the lucky chance between us is not absolute. Not everyone can easily enter this city to kill people, especially me. So, only the people in this city could do it back then. More importantly, the whole world was skeptical of what I saw. They didn't believe me at all." The old man continued, "I don't know what will happen after I find him. Ordinary people like us can never predict Hao Ian's arrangements. But I always believe that he is a person who has a great lucky chance with me. I thought that I came to Chong and to understand this lucky chance, until I met you." The old man looked at Song Song's slightly dark cheeks and bright willowy eyes. He was silent for a long time. He silently thought about the true reason why so many loyal subordinates sacrificed themselves, which made the whole Peach Mountain and the Tang Empire feel uneasy and attracted him to Chang'an. Was it the dark shadow or the person in front of him? Song Song's eyelashes drooped slightly and asked calmly, "What can I learn from you?" The old man looked at her slightly fluttering eyelashes and ordinary face. He said, "Divine skill." Sang Sang asked, "Is divine skill very powerful?" The old man nodded and said, "Very powerful." Sang Sang lowered her head even more, which made her eyelashes look longer. She whispered, "My young master is very powerful. After I learn divine skill, can I help him beat people?" The old man smiled and said, "Of course you can." Sang Sang raised her head and looked at the old man attentively with her slightly dark face. She asked bravely, "Can I defeat you?" The old man looked at the little girl's little face. He looked at the pair of eyes that were like clear spring water between the slightly black mountain rocks. It was as if he wanted to see into the deepest part of the clear spring water. He still did not see a trace of impurity, just transparent, absolutely transparent. He could not help but let out a sigh from the depths of his heart. He said in a solemn tone, as if he was prophesying, "Definitely." Sang Sang asked, "What is divine skill?" The old man replied, Cultivation is about perceiving and then controlling the aura between heaven and earth. Divine skill is about perceiving and controlling the divine light of Hao Yin. The so-called divine light, you have seen it since you were born. You have seen it when you wake up in the morning. You have seen it when you close your door at dusk. You have seen it in summer. You have seen it in winter. You have seen it all the time. Sang slightly frowned and asked, "What is that?" The night in Chang and was quiet. The sky was filled with stars, but it was not as bright as the day. The old man stood in the cramped courtyard and slowly spread his arms, as if he wanted to bear all the light in the world. Hao Yin's divine light is the sunlight. As soon as he finished speaking, the tip of the middle finger of the old man's right hand that was sticking out of the sleeve of his dirty cotton jacket suddenly became bright. It was unknown where the luster came from, but it was slowly released from the inside out. It was like a flower of light covering all the lines on his fingertips. It was holy and milky white, causing people to feel respect in their hearts. The old man looked at the little girl in front of him and said calmly, "To perceive Hao Yin's divine light, even if it takes 10 years, it will not be too long. Therefore, what you need at the beginning is great forbearance and patience." Hearing this, Sang seemed to be thinking. She raised her right index finger and put her slender finger into the dark winter night. The slightly dark finger gently swayed in the wind, and then produced a dim light like a candle in the wind, which could be extinguished at any time. However, it was still lit and did not go out. The old man looked at the light at the tip of her slender index finger, as if he was drunk and did not want to wake up. In the winter of the 14th year of the Tianqi era, the great divine priest of light who escaped from the West Hill Divine Palace came to Chang because of a feeling. He did not find the shadow of the dark night, but he found his successor. This was probably some kind of Tianqi. Somewhere on the grassland, not far from the city of Wei in the northwest border of the Tang Empire. Under a dying winter tree, a scholar in a cotton-padded jacket was cooking. He calmly and attentively looked at the scroll in his left hand. Suddenly, he thought of something and took a ladle of water from his waist. He poured it into the milky white soup pot and slightly suppressed the boiling in the pot. Taking advantage of the time he had won, he began to slowly cut the meat. The perfectly frozen mutton danced under the sharp knife like snowflakes. However, his movements were too slow. Before he could finish cutting the meat, the soup pot boiled again. Another ladle of water was poured into the soup pot, and the scholar continued to cut the meat. The tall headmaster of the academy held a bowl and chopsticks that had already been mixed. He waited by the soup pot and sighed anxiously from time to time. When it comes to fate and lucky chance, no one knows what they will see or encounter. No one knows what it means to them. Ideas and reality are often two opposite worlds. For example, the general and the woman we saw in the city of Wei a few days ago. Maybe they will live forever, or maybe they will return to the Central Plains next year. But no matter what happens, they may not be as happy as they seem. The headmaster of the academy tapped the empty bowl with his chopsticks and shook his head. He sighed and said, "Not happy doesn't mean it will be gloomy. I don't think it's a kind of sadness. Instead, I think it's full of comedy. For example, the soup and mutton are here, but I haven't eaten it for an hour. It doesn't mean I will always be sad. Maybe the first bite of mutton will be the best thing I have ever eaten in my life." Any student must learn to hear the teacher's true intentions from his dignified words. As the eldest brother of the academy, of course, the scholar could best understand the headmaster's likes and dislikes. Therefore, he put the scroll back to his waist and began to cut the meat faster in case the teacher would really get mad later. However, as Chen Pippi had once told Ning Ke, eldest brother was very serious in his work. That was why he did things very slowly. Even though the headmaster of the academy was waiting beside the soup pot with bowls and chopsticks like a beggar, which gave him unprecedented pressure, his speed of cutting meat did not improve much. In order to distract the teacher and relieve the current mental pressure, the eldest brother asked while cutting the meat, "Teacher, can't you see the future?" Hearing this question, the headmaster of the academy was furious. He pointed to the gray winter sky and shouted, "I can't even see the sky. How can I see the future?" To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 2:13. The headmaster put down his fingers and looked at the boiling soup pot and the slices of meat on the chopping board that looked like snow. He said bitterly, "If I knew everything, why would I live like a stray dog?" Eldest brother cut the delicious mutton and thought to himself with a smile, "Teacher, when have you ever been afraid?" The headmaster put the bowl and chopsticks on the chopping board and rolled up his sleeves. He easily grabbed the sharp kitchen knife from eldest brother's hand. With a few swishing sounds, the mutton slices flew and piled up into a snowy mountain. The mutton was cooked in the boiling soup. The headmaster happily grabbed the food with his chopsticks and ate to his heart's content. The soup dripped down his beard. He did not even think of letting his most beloved disciple, the old yellow bull, who was eating grass on the meadow, roll its eyes at him and mooed discontentedly. Eldest brother smiled and shook his head at his teacher's happy expression. He wiped his hands clean and walked slowly to the withered winter tree. Looking at the blue lake not far below the meadow and the looming horse gang on the other side of the lake, he slowly raised his eyebrows and asked thoughtfully, "Teacher, is this the Shubby Lake of youngest brother?" As time passed, some things that he didn't know would be known by some means. For example, the one who entered the back mountain of the academy was not Prince Long Ching, but a little guy named Ning Quebec. The headmaster filled a bowl of mutton soup and drank it slowly. His slender eyebrows and tail seemed to be dancing in the winter wind. He looked at the nearby lake and somewhere further away and said, "He grew up in the city of Wei and became an adult in Shubby Lake." Eldest brother nodded and looked back at the headmaster. He asked, "Teacher, why are we coming to the city of Wei?" The headmaster held the soup bowl and looked at the horse gang who were busy making a living by the Shubby Lake. He said, "After all, he is my student. Although we haven't met, it's on the way. Let's consider it a home visit." Eldest brother thought of the scene before he left the academy in Chong and last spring. He thought of the headmaster's words and the big black umbrella on the lad's back. He asked, "Teacher, did you know that youngest brother would become youngest brother?" The headmaster put down the soup bowl and sighed with satisfaction while touching his slightly bulging belly. He shook his head and said, "There is no such thing as fate in the world. In this case, how can I predict it? How Ian can't arrange everything." The headmaster looked up at the clear sky of the grassland and seemed to see the trembling little boy holding a chopper in the woodshed more than a decade ago. He said with emotion, "Many years ago, I saw your youngest brother. At that time, I just felt that he looked like an old friend. I didn't expect that he would survive and come to me." Eldest brother looked at the grassland and said with some concern, "I don't know if youngest brother can handle going into the wilderness alone." The headmaster said, "That is a difficult child. The wilderness is his home, so he won't be too embarrassed. If he is really embarrassed, aren't you his senior brother?" Eldest senior brother smiled and lowered his head, as gentle as the spring breeze. The shrill sound of arrows piercing through the air was like the shrill sound of a flute, instantly tearing apart the twilight above the camp. Because the distance was too far when the arrow flew out of the camp, it was already crooked and slowed down. Like a drunken man, it fell to the ground in a sorry state. It didn't cause any damage, but everyone in the camp knew that the other party's whistling arrow was meant to warn or show off, so they didn't feel relaxed. The smoke and dust in the distance of the grassland gradually dispersed, revealing more than 100 horsemen. Vaguely, the barbarians wrapped in animal hide and cotton armor on the horses' backs were mighty and majestic. They held the reins with one hand and screamed crazily, as if they had seen a large number of prey. The Yin Kingdom's cavalry in the camp split up to meet them. When they were a few arrows away, the grassland barbarians whistled and dispersed. They circled around the flat plains and shallow waters around the camp. They refused to approach, but also had no intention of leaving. Ning Ke was the first to find the traces of the horse gang. After giving a warning, he jumped off the carriage and silently led the big black horse, ready to mount the saddle at any time. However, looking at the grassland barbarians, whistling and wandering around, he gradually frowned. In the winter grassland, It was already a large group of horse gang that could gather more than 100 elite horsemen. He didn't know when they started to target the grain delivery team, so he subconsciously looked to his side. The young boys and girls of Black Ink Garden had lived in the Great River Kingdom in the far south for a long time. They had only heard about the ferocity and terror of the Northern Horse Gang in legends. This was the first time in their lives that they had to face these grassland horse gang. However, all the disciples of Black Ink Garden, including Cat Girl, were silent and occasionally nervous, but absolutely not flustered. Each of them held a long handle of a thin knife in their hands and vigilantly waited for the battle to come. At this moment, 3 horsemen galloped out from the north of the camp. They scattered at high speed under the last red flame twilight. Nominally, the disciples of Black Ink Garden of Great River Kingdom were responsible for the grain delivery to the Left King's palace in the grassland. However, the Yin Kingdom's cavalry, who were responsible for the safety of the grain team, didn't really obey the order. They were aloof from each other and disliked each other. However, looking at the 3 horsemen galloping out, Zhuo Zhihua couldn't help but praise them. The Yin Kingdom's general's reaction speed is not slow to decide to send a messenger to the palace in the first place. Hearing this, Ning Ke shook his head and led the big black horse to her side. He said, "These barbarians who look like horse gang might be the cavalry of the Left King's palace." Zhuo Zhihua and the girls beside the carriage were shocked when they heard this. Ning Ke didn't explain. He looked at the grassland horse gang wandering in the wilderness and the Yin Kingdom's cavalrymen galloping out like 3 arrows. He said, "If we were at the frontier fortress of the Yin territory in the south, there might be a chance to send a messenger. But now that we are deep in the grassland, it is impossible for these 3 cavalrymen to escape." After defeating the Yuan Kingdom monk by the Jade Waste Lake and living together for the past few days, the girls of Great River Kingdom trusted Ning Ke more and more. They subconsciously believed in his judgment. Cat Girl jumped on the carriage in shock and looked at the 3 Yin cavalrymen who were getting farther and farther away. Her face was full of worry. The Yin Kingdom's general's reaction speed was not slow, but it was precisely because of this that Ning Ke could no longer change the fate of the 3 Yin cavalrymen. Moreover, he was just an ordinary disciple of Black Ink Garden of Great River Kingdom. The sun was sinking lower and lower. The light on the grassland was getting dimmer, and the twilight was getting thicker. The 3 Yin cavalrymen were like tiny silhouettes in front of a blood-red canvas. The 3 cavalrymen were either shot by arrows or stopped by the horse ropes. They fell to the ground, and there was no more movement. After a while, dozens of grassland horse gang came from the same direction. The corpses of the 3 Yin cavalrymen were dragged by ropes behind the horses. From time to time, the corpses would bump into the soil on the ground. The scene was bloody and the scene was horrible. The 2 groups of grassland horse gang gathered together and let out a burst of arrogant laughter. The so-called clamor was nothing more than this. Ning Ke had seen such scenes on the grassland many times. Back then, he had also dragged the corpse of the leader of the horse gang by the Shubi Lake for a week as a demonstration. Therefore, he was not moved. But for the young girls and the civilians in the grain transport team, such a tragic scene would definitely make them have nightmares every night. They could faintly hear the sound of breathing around them becoming rapid and panicky. As for the 200 Yin cavalrymen, they were in an uproar when they saw their comrades being killed and humiliated. They only managed to calm down under the strong suppression of their commanding officer. No one was a match for these barbarians on the grassland, at least before the Desolate Man moved south. The previous scene was proof. Therefore, even though the Yin army had the advantage in numbers and had the disciples of Black Ink Garden as the main fighting force, they could only suppress their anger and fear. They used the grain transport team to set up a simple formation and used the fastest speed to set up a defensive attack, waiting for the grassland horse gang to attack. The atmosphere in the camp became unusually tense. It was the same after the dozens of Yin cavalrymen returned to the camp. This was because even if they had not seen it with their own eyes, they had heard of the savagery of the grassland horse gang. Especially the civilians in the grain transport team. Their faces were ashen and their bodies were trembling. They could not even complete the simplest transportation work. Unexpectedly, the grassland horse gang did not take advantage of the last light and the good opportunity to attack when the people in the camp were distracted. Instead, they held the reins and stopped a few arrows away, watching the people in the camp coldly. Among them, the three leaders of the horse gang were waving their horse whips and pointing, looking extremely arrogant. As night fell, a bonfire was lit in the camp. The generals of the Yin army personally set up surveillance posts. The soldiers looked nervously at the pitch-black periphery of the grassland, facing the imminent danger. Almost no one could sleep peacefully, thinking that once they fell asleep, they would not wake up again. They were worried that the horse gang would attack at night. Ning Ke knew the behavior of the horse gang very well. Whether it was the real horse gang or the palace cavalry disguised as horse gang, once they got on a horse and became a thief, they would firmly follow the behavior of the horse gang. The horse gang would not choose to attack at night. He set up his small tent beside the horse carriage and prepared to have a good sleep in preparation for the bloody battle the next morning. A gust of night wind blew, lifting the tent and the curtain of the horse carriage. His pupil shrank because he found that there was no one in the horse carriage. He did not know where the girl in white, Emo Shan Shan, had gone. He quietly climbed to the top of the horse carriage and looked at the periphery of the camp with the help of the extremely dim starlight. There was a circle of burning bonfire, and on the other side of the flame, he could vaguely see a thin figure. On this piece of the winter plains, except for him, who had extremely sharp eyes, probably no one could see the thin figure. Under the illumination of the fire and starlight, the thin figure's white robe seemed even thinner, as if it would float away with a blow of the night wind. It was like a ghost or a spirit, and no one knew what it was doing. Ning Ke looked at it silently, deep in thought. Then he jumped off the horse carriage and fell asleep with his clothes on. When the night was at its darkest, several shrill screams suddenly sounded from the southwest of the camp, as well as the wild howls of the horses. The Yin cavalry, who had been vigilant in the north, was startled and looked in that direction. Ning Ke, who was in the tent beside the horse carriage, had woken up. He put his ear to the ground and listened for a while. Through the gap of the curtain, he saw the girl's figure cut out by the candlelight in the horse carriage. It gradually became brighter. He smiled and then closed his eyes, continuing to sleep peacefully. In his dream, he wondered when he could write such a powerful fire talisman. Happy face. I wish everyone a happy Lantern Festival and a prosperous life. Just like this talisman, it smells so good. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 214. No one dared to investigate at night. There were also people like Ning Ke who knew what had happened and didn't want to investigate. The next morning, people in the camp found that the horse gang, which had been closely following not far from the north, had disappeared without a trace. However, before they could rejoice, they heard horse hooves and sharp whistles again. The horse gang came again in the morning, but they kept a distance vigilantly, not as arrogant as yesterday. Zhuo Jihua summoned the Yin army general and severely reprimanded him. After all, these girls from the Great River Kingdom were cultivators of the Black Ink Garden, so they had a different identity. The Yin army general could only listen to the reprimand. Then he organized the team and left the camp. Ignoring the horse gang who were patrolling outside, they crossed a gentle slope to the south and continued to march towards the northeast palace. It was not until they left the camp that they saw a few charred horse corpses in the southwest direction. They thought it was probably the result of the chaos last night. The charred horse corpses had been eaten by the wild wolves in the wilderness. Their limbs were broken and looked terrible. There were white burn marks on the gravel, as if it had been burned for a whole night. Both the Yin cavalry and the ordinary coachmen were frightened, and no one dared to speak. In the following days, the horse gang continued to follow the grain team, but they seemed to be more cautious. They harassed, but did not attack, nor did they attack. For some reason, they were divided into several small teams. The horse gang closest to the grain team only had about 10 riders, but each of them had 2 horses. Obviously, they were greedy for speed. They had been in the wilderness for a long time and were not far from the left tent palace. If the elite cavalry ran at full speed, it would only take about 4 or 5 days to arrive. But now they were moving slowly with the grain wagons and people. Based on the current speed, it would take at least half a month to meet with the cavalry of the palace. And after Ning Kei's words, people felt that the origin of the horse gang was a little strange. They could not help but feel confused. They thought that even if they met with the cavalry of the palace, they might not be really safe. The number of horse gang wandering around was sometimes large and sometimes small, but there was always a certain number of them in sight to maintain the pressure on the grain team. Several days passed. Although the two sides did not really fight, the fear of being attacked at any time and the silent and oppressive atmosphere caused the morale of the grain team to gradually slacken, especially the pale-faced civilian workers. It seemed that if there was a thunder in the sky, they would probably be scared to death. Zhu Jihua came to the side of the carriage and looked anxiously at the figures of the horse gang in the distant sky. She said, "We must make these horse gang afraid. If we let them follow us like this, we may be defeated on our own before they attack us. Moreover, there are other benefits in staying further away." It was not convenient to explain the advantages of being further away. The disciples of Black Ink Garden around the horse carriage were well aware of it. If there was a danger of the camp collapsing, the horse gang would be further away. As for what would happen to the Yin army and civilians, no one could care too much about it in this dangerous wilderness. Ning Kei did not participate in the discussion. The Tang Empire and the Great River Kingdom had been on good terms for generations. His relationship with these girls was also very good. But after all, he was taking advantage of the situation to enter the wilderness. At this dangerous moment, it was not convenient for him to express too many opinions. In addition, the more important reason was that his attention was always on the horse carriage. It fell on the girl in white with straight eyebrows, Mo Shanshan. After seeing the fire talisman that night, he vaguely guessed the identity of the girl in white in the horse carriage. Thinking of returning from the wilderness last spring with the disguised Tang princess, he could not help but feel a little emotional about the fate arranged by Hao Yin and his own luck. If he could be with such a person, no matter how dangerous it would be a little less. There were more Yin cavalry escorting the grain team than the horse gang. Together with the girl disciples from Black Ink Garden, it was difficult to distinguish the strength of the two sides. Perhaps it was for this reason that the horse gang always followed the grain team closely and did not choose to attack. Since the tragedy of the wildfire that day, there was not even a night attack. The horse gang did not launch a night attack, but the grain team could not relax their patrols at night. They were even more nervous every night. Perhaps no one could see it, but every time Ning Kei woke up in the middle of the night, he would see Mo Shanshan in white appear outside the camp at night. He knew that she was setting up a talisman array. This went on for several days. No matter how strong the girl Mo Shanshan was, her psyche power was rapidly consumed, and she could not support it for a long time. Seeing the slightly round cheeks behind the curtain gradually thin and pale, Ning Kei finally decided to take action. He learned talisman Taoism from Master Yensei and understood that before entering the knowing destiny divine talisman master state, the characteristics of talisman Taoism determined that a talisman master could only focus on defense and cooperation, and it was difficult to take the initiative to attack. Although Mo Shanshan's state was unfathomable, she obviously lacked a lot of experience in the application of talisman Taoism in the battle. It was late at night, and there was no half moon in the sky, only a few stars. The camp was brightly lit, but the surrounding wilderness was dark, and no one knew how many hidden dangers there were. The carriage slightly shook, and Mo Shanshan quietly got off. She was ready to go outside the camp to draw talisman arrays. Suddenly, her eyes slightly brightened, and she turned around and coldly looked at the inconspicuous small tent behind the carriage. Ning Kei opened the tent curtain and walked out. He looked at her and said, "If you are alone, the horse gang outside will not be able to stop you. But you are not alone. You have to take care of so many companions and grain wagons, and I don't know how many days you have to take care of them. You can't hold on like this." Mo Shanshan looked at him, as if she was looking at the dark night behind him. Her eyes were cold and indifferent. Then she slightly lowered her eyes, and her long and slightly sparse eyelashes gently blinked but she did not say a word. Ninkei looked at her expression and continued. If you are a divine talisman master, you can burn all the horse gang with a talisman. The problem is that you are not a divine talisman master, so you have to change your method. Mo Shanshan raised her head, looked at him, and indifferently asked, what method? Ninkei said, whether the horse gang outside is real or fake, or whether they are raised by the left tent palace or the Yin people, we have to use the horse gang's method to deal with them. The extremely faint starlight fell on Mo Shanshan's beautiful but somewhat dull face, reflecting her black eyebrows more clearly. She looked at Ninkei and asked after a moment of silence, what method? There can only be one reason for the horse gang to take action, and that is profit. As long as they are sure that the price they pay will exceed the profit, they will naturally retreat. Ninkei said, obviously, the horse gang's intelligence missed you. They don't know your existence, so they are forced to change their plan. Then we have already taken the lead. Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly and suddenly asked, do you know who I am? Ninkei did not answer this question. Mo Shanshan repeated the previous question, what method can we use to drive away the horse gang? Ninkei replied, the so-called horse gang is a thief when mounted and a citizen when dismounted. They don't believe in moral judgment, nor do they care about the general trend of the world. They only care about whose knife is sharper. If we want to frighten or scare them away, as I said, we have to use the horse gang's method. Mo Shanshan continued to repeat, what method? Ninkei looked at the girl's beautiful but indifferent cheeks and suddenly laughed, saying, as I said, the horse gang's method. He was very persistent and bored, but Mo Shanshan was even more persistent and bored than him, and continued to repeat, what method? Ninkei shook his head and replied with a smile, we will become thieves on the horse and kill them. Mo Shanshan replied concisely, I won't kill anyone. Ninkei said concisely, I can teach you. Mo Shanshan replied concisely, okay. After a moment, Ninkei led the big black horse, and Mo Shanshan led a white horse. They slowly walked towards the dark wilderness outside the camp. The night wind blew the girl's fine hair on her temples, and she suddenly asked, where did these horse gang come from? Ninkei could not make an accurate judgment about the horse gang that surrounded them, and seemed to be ready to attack at any time. He was familiar with the wilderness in the west and the horse gang in the wilderness. Even if he started from the cause of the incident, he still lacked enough information and the ability to analyze the political situation. The grain team, supervised by the girls of the Great River Kingdom, carried the goodwill of the countries in the Central Plains and the intention of the Divine Hall to negotiate for peace. Now that the situation in the wilderness was tense, the authentic horse gang, with a keen sense of smell, had long disappeared. The horse gang that appeared now obviously wanted to kill and rob the grain. Their purpose had nothing to do with the grain, but to sabotage the peace talks. There were not many forces that had a reason to do so. The Desolate Man's tribe that moved south from the cold region of the far north should not be able to raise such a large group of horse gang in such a short period of time. The Ueluan Kingdom wanted to frame the people of the Great River Kingdom, but no one would be so bored and sinister just for a warm stream. The Yin Kingdom had been suffering from the Left Tent Palace for a long time, and they did not want to miss the opportunity to pacify the North. However, would the Emperor of Yin secretly take the risk of offending the Divine Hall? After thinking about it, Ninkei could only think of the simplest possibilities. Once all of them were eliminated, he could not think of anyone else who had the ability to raise such a large group of horse gang on the grassland. However, it was not a big problem for him that he could not figure it out. Ninkei's attitude towards the horse gang, who he had been dealing with for many years, had always been very clear. Only dead horse gangs were good horse gangs. Then, he would kill the dozen or so horse gang closest to him first. There were clouds floating above the night sky, covering the last few remaining stars. Far away from the lights of the camp, the surrounding wilderness was dark, and only the faint sound of horse hooves could be heard. Coming to the meadow about an arrow's length away from the dozen or so horse gangs stalking them, Ninkei gently lifted the reins. The big black horse shook its head impatiently, but still stopped as instructed. The horse gang was naturally vigilant. Even the faintest sound of horse hooves would wake them up from their sleep. Ninkei slightly exerted strength in his waist and abdomen. His feet stepped on the stirrups to stand up, and he took out the boxwood bow from behind. Mo Shanshan glanced at him and thought, "What's the use of arrows at such a distance?" The horse gang in the distance had already woken up and were ready to fight. In the dark night, Ninkei could not see his 5 fingers holding the bow, so he quietly looked in that direction and then slowly closed his eyes. He put an arrow on the bow, aimed at an unknown place, and then released the bowstring. The bowstring vibrated and hummed in the night sky. A horse gang in the distance was shot in the chest by an arrow. Blood spurted out, and he fell to the ground with a muffled groan. "I had a bad cold for a whole day, and I almost fainted. Damn it. Fortunately, I wrote it out. Damn it." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 215. Ninkei is Mr. 13 of the second floor. The meaning is clear. He is an idiot. I'm also an idiot. That's why I decided to write 10,000 words 7 days a week starting from February 13th. I'll get it done, but the beginning will definitely be the hardest, so don't worry about me if your writing is rough. Next week, I'll start revising the second volume. Continue writing. See you later. No matter if it was a thief or a soldier, the person sitting on the saddle usually used a short bow or a machete because of the limited space. But Ninkei was different. Since he started fighting in the city of Wei, the boxwood bow and padao he used were longer. So he was used to stepping on the saddle, straightening his body to draw the bow and shoot arrows, or draw his machete to cut people. Although it was a little inconvenient to operate, in the eyes of the onlookers, this posture was actually quite magnificent. When he shot another arrow and killed the second horse gang in the distance in the darkness of the night, the girl Mo Shanshan, who had been following him expressionlessly, finally had some splendor in her eyes. The wilderness was full of winter clouds that covered the stars. In the dark night, even the hand holding the bow could not be seen clearly. But Ninkei could accurately shoot the horse gang a stone's throw away. It was really incredible. It was as if the night could not cover his eyes at all, as if he could clearly see everything in the darkness. Although Ninkei only had 10 of his acupoints opened and the chi of heaven and earth that he could control was too little, his meditation and mental training over the years had made his psyche power perception as sharp as a needle. Thus, he was extremely sensitive to the aura changes of things around him. When he climbed the mountain on the second floor of the academy, he relied on this to walk through the mountain path. At this time, in the dark night, he could easily see the horse gang and lock them in front of his arrow. It was also because of his extremely condensed and sensitive psyche power. The psyche power came out of the sense of perception and touched the chi between heaven and earth with the night wind. So to him, the wilderness was like daytime. This method should not have been used by cultivators in the past because it wasted precious psyche power. If there was enough psyche power, he could directly kill those ordinary horse gang. Why use psyche power as a means of detection? All in all, it could only be said that Ninkei was different from ordinary cultivators. The amount of chi of heaven and earth he could control was so little that it made people sigh. His psyche power was so abundant and sensitive that it made people sigh. His willpower to combine cultivation and fighting was so great that it made people sigh. A few sigh had created such a scene. When Ninkei shot the second arrow, Mo Shanshan quietly stared at him. As the most outstanding cultivator of the young generation in the world, she acutely noticed that there was a trace of condensed psyche power oscillating beside her at this moment. She could not help but frown slightly and thought to herself, "Is he really a cultivator?" The horse gang in the distance had just woken up from their sleep when 2 of their companions were killed by the arrow. Although they were shocked at how the arrow could be so accurate in the dark night, they still reacted very quickly. They jumped on the back of the horse, fiercely squeezed the horse's abdomen, and ran wildly toward the direction of the arrow. They wanted to shorten the distance between the 2 sides in the shortest time, so that the enemy could not display his terrifying archery. At the same time, they also wanted the darkness to no longer be a curtain in front of them, so that they could fight back. The hooves sounded like rain. In the process of the horse gang rushing over, Ninkei pulled the bowstring, and an arrow shot into the head of a horse. The horse screamed and fell to the ground, throwing the horse gang on its back to the ground. Another arrow narrowly brushed past the cheek of a horse gang and flew away. The horse gang on the grassland were good at riding and shooting. While charging, they retracted their bodies into the horse's abdomen, so Ninkei's arrows could not directly threaten them. In a flash, accompanied by the increasingly clear and dense hooves, the nearly 10-horse gang swept over like a gust of wind. One could even see the reflection of the sharp weapons. The big black horse had not experienced a real battle in the wild, but it was not afraid when it saw its own kind rushing closer and closer. Instead, its eyes revealed the light of excitement. It kept stamping its front hooves excitedly and wanted to rush forward without waiting for Ninkei to pull the reins. Looking at the approaching horse gang and listening to their shrill and furious roars, Emo Shanshan did not know how Ninkei was going to deal with them. Her fingers that were hidden in her white sleeves gently picked up something. The excitement of the big black horse did not comfort Ning Quebec. He angrily slapped its head heavily and signaled it to be quiet. Then he jumped off the horse's back. As soon as his feet landed on the ground, he did not hesitate and rushed towards a horse gang that was sweeping up the dust and gravel. The distance between the two sides was already very close. It was only a matter of a moment before they came into contact. No one had the time to pull the bow and shoot an arrow. The horse gang finally saw the appearance of the enemy clearly. The two horses on the left and right at the front lifted the reins and directly collided with Ning Quebec. The few horses following behind sat up straight with strange cries, pulled out the machetes from their waists, and waved them continuously. There was a clang. Ninkei pulled out the padao on his back and crossed his feet to avoid the two horses that came with a strong gust of wind. He turned his right hand, and the blade drew out two snow-white rays of light. Then, blood suddenly appeared. The two horses cried out in pain and suddenly fell forward, landing heavily on the plains with two muffled sounds. Their front hooves, which had been chopped off by the padao, were still flying in the air due to inertia, drawing out two miserable streaks of blood. The blade attacked, following a curved and deadly cold path. If it was an ordinary person, perhaps he would not be able to avoid such a strange chopping. But Ninkei was too familiar with the horse gang and the machetes that they used. He was so familiar that even if he closed his eyes, he could easily avoid being touched by them. At this time, the night was deep. There was not much difference between opening or closing one's eyes. Therefore, he easily lowered his head, turned, and swept sideways, avoiding the several machetes from the horse gang. Then, he clenched his hands, and the slender padao tore a few terrifying cracks in the night sky. It cut off several horse hooves, split open the chest and abdomen of the horse gang, and brought down a few strands of fine horse mane. Then, it was heavily inserted into the slightly hard mud of the field. In the blink of an eye, he had rushed to the front of the horse gang. Under his padao, 2 horse gang members died and 5 horses fell. But the machetes in the hands of the horse gang did not leave any mark on him. At this time, the winter clouds in the sky occasionally scattered, revealing some starlight. Although they still could not see his face clearly, they could clearly see his figure. The horse gang lifted the reins and turned back to look at Ning Kei, who was standing in the field with a knife. Their bodies were stiff, and their hands holding the machetes kept trembling. But they still felt extremely cold. The horse gang used the fastest speed to rescue their companions who were still breathing on the ground. They rode together to the periphery for a distance and looked at Ning Kei nervously and vigilantly, but they did not have the courage to draw their bows and aim at him. Ning Kei walked over and listened to the miserable howls of the horses with broken hooves in the night. He held the padao in his hand and cut the throats of the horses slowly and steadily, letting them die at the fastest speed. Then, he looked at the horse gang not far away and stretched out his fingers to shake in the night wind. He did not know if the other party could see his movements clearly and if they could understand the meaning of his movements. "Why don't you kill all these horse gang?" Mo Shansham looked at the horse gang who were fleeing in the night and asked in confusion. "The horse gang can't be killed." Ning Kei said, "At least I can't kill this group of horse gang who are following us alone." Mo Shanshan turned back to look at him. She looked very focused, but her eyes were still drifting, showing that she was not focused. Ninkei looked at her beautiful round face and said after a moment of silence, "The reason why I killed people tonight is that I hope they can bring back an accurate message." "What message?" "I want to tell them that in addition to you, the Talisman Master, there is another person who is good at killing Horse Gang in the grain delivery team. If this group of Horse Gang wants to eat us, they have to pay a greater price. If the harvest is not proportional to the risk, maybe they will withdraw by themselves." Emo Shanshan said, "Although I have never met Horse Gang, I have heard many legends about Grassland Horse Gang. They are known for being cold and bloodthirsty. How could they retreat because of some small setbacks? The colder and more murderous a person is, the more he is afraid of death. I may know more about Horse Gang than you do." He continued to say, "Tonight, I came to kill Horse Gang, not only to let them bring back a clear message, but also to teach you some things." Emo Shanshan's ink-like condensed but refreshing eyebrows frowned. "Teach me to kill people? Kill people, or how not to be killed?" Ninkei looked at her and said seriously, "You are the most powerful person in this team. When the Horse Gang attacks, I can save my life, but the lives of those ordinary soldiers and civilians still depend on you. But a few days ago, you wasted your psyche power to arrange talisman arrays outside the camp, which seems to me to be a waste." He said, "You are our big killer, so you should not be used for defense, but for attack." Emo Shanshan was silent for a long time after hearing these words, and then she said, "I have been cultivating talisman Taoism since childhood. In my understanding, only divine talisman masters can take the initiative to attack." Ninkei remembered what Master Yensei taught him in Chong and City and could not help laughing. He looked at her expressionless steamed bun face, which always had some natural joy, and said, "Who said that talisman masters can attack before reaching knowing destiny state? As long as it is used properly, even if the steam bun is frozen hard, it can still kill people." Although Ninkei had a clear understanding of the Grassland Horse Gang and had dealt with them for many years, the development of the situation was not completely as Ninkei expected. On the second day, the Horse Gang stayed away from the grain delivery team, but they did not disperse. Instead, they formed a team again and followed them from a distance. Distance can make people feel beautiful and safe. Although the distance between the Horse Gang and the grain delivery team had no real meaning for safety, they could clearly feel that the mental pressure of the Yin soldiers and civilians in the team was much less. Even the girls from the Great River Kingdom could occasionally see smiles on their faces. A corner of the curtain of the carriage was lifted, and Emo Shanshan looked at Ninkei on the big black horse beside the carriage. She looked at his cheeks that were mostly covered by the bamboo hat, and suddenly asked, "Are you familiar with the wilderness?" Ninkei nodded. Emo Shanshan looked at the shadow cast by the bamboo hat on his face and said, "The wind in the wilderness is strong, and ordinary people should not wear bamboo hats. But why do you and many horse gangs wear bamboo hats?" Ninkei hooked the tie on his chin with his little finger and said, "With the tie, we are not afraid of being blown away by the wind. As for why we're used to wearing bamboo hats, the sun in the wilderness is too strong, so this thing can block the sun. The most important thing is that it can cover our faces." The purpose of covering their faces was not to be ashamed to see others, but to not let others see their faces. Whether it was the Horse Gang or him, they always protected their identities very thoroughly. Catgirl looked at the group of horse gangs that were almost parallel to the grain delivery team in the northeast direction. She frowned and asked, "Senior brother, where do these horse gangs come from? This place should not be far from the palace. Does no one care about them?" "I seem to have answered this question a few days ago." Ninkei pulled the bamboo hat lower and said, "Many of the most powerful horse gangs on the grassland have masters. Now the group of horse gangs following us obviously have masters." Catgirl asked curiously, "How do you know?" Ninkei looked at the group of horse gangs in the distance and said after a moment of silence, "Because these horse gangs are too disciplined." "Then who is their master?" "I don't know." Ninkei shook his head and thought that there were not many forces on the grassland that could afford to support such a large group of horse gangs. However, as analyzed a few days ago, those forces had no reason to instigate the horse gangs to rob the grain delivery team. The grain delivery team represented the attitude of the countries of the Central Plains and the left King's Palace. The grain delivery team mainly carried a symbolic meaning, and the quantity was not too much. If the horse gangs came for the grain, they should immediately withdraw when they found that the grain delivery team was very difficult to deal with. Unless the horse gangs did not rob and kill the grain delivery team for the grain, but to break the agreement or to target someone in the grain delivery team, then this matter would become very tricky. Thinking of this, he subconsciously glanced at the window beside him with the corner of his eyes. A winter wind blew and lifted a corner of the curtain, revealing Mo Shanshan's calm and indifferent face. In his view, the only person in the grain delivery team who was qualified to attract so many horse gangs was the girl in white in the carriage. Of course, when thinking about this problem, he excluded himself in advance because he believed that no one knew that he was disguised as a male disciple of Black Ink Garden and mixed in the grain delivery team. The situation gradually deteriorated as Ning Ke thought. The atmosphere in the grain delivery team only relaxed for a day, but quickly became more tense and even panicked. Because in the next 2 or 3 days, the horse gangs that followed the grain delivery team not only did not leave, but also new small groups of horse gangs appeared continuously and merged with the horse gangs in the distance. This place was not too far from the palace. Even if the elite cavalry came to help, it would only take about 2.5 days to arrive. It was impossible for the grain delivery team to break out of the encirclement with light, so they could only hope for reinforcements. That night, 2 bunches of fireworks rose into the night sky from the camp, brightening up the deep night and also illuminating the mountain-like horse gangs in the distance. Along the way, the fireworks bloomed and the horse gangs converged. The number of horse gangs following the grain delivery team increased and gradually became a black sea of people and horses. Even if the people in the grain delivery team looked at it, they would feel frightened. Ning Ke became more and more silent. He looked at the more than 600 horse gangs in the distance, and the doubts in his heart became more and more intense. What did these horse gangs want to do? To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 216. A simple quantitative analysis could lead to a relatively accurate conclusion. For example, a middle-aged man who had 17 concubines must be rich. An official in Chang, who had more than 2 of Ning Ke's calligraphy in his study, must not only be rich, but must also have a high status. Therefore, when the number of horse gangs silently following the grain team exceeded 600, the power behind the horse gang quickly surfaced. It was either the Yin Kingdom or the palace. Because in this wilderness, only the Yin Kingdom and the Left King's Palace could afford to support so many horse gang. However, Ning Ke still could not understand the purpose of this group of horse gang, because both the Yin Kingdom and the Left King's Palace should be very welcoming of the peace talks. Ning Ke became silent, which meant that he was also beginning to feel nervous. There were 200 Yin cavalrymen in the grain team, more than 100 commoners, and a dozen cultivating girls from the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom. In the beginning, the strength of the 2 sides was not that different on paper. He had thought that by frightening the other party, according to the horse gang's usual way of doing things, the other party might retreat. However, seeing that there were more and more horse gang gathered in the wilderness, he finally confirmed that the other party's purpose was not simple robbery, but something else. Now that there were more than 600 horse gang around the grain team, they had a complete advantage in terms of strength. Even if he brought Mo Shanshan with him and rushed over and killed more than a dozen of them, it would not affect the overall situation. No new horse gang joined the team, and the 600 horse gang followed the grain team slowly north in silence. For some unknown reason, the horse gang did not attack. They seemed to be hesitating, as if they were waiting for an order. However, regardless of whether they attacked or not, the horse gang was there, wandering in the surrounding wilderness, and the people in the grain team were under great psychological pressure. They felt that there was a dark cloud above their heads that could not be blown away by the wind, and instead, it was getting lower and lower. The atmosphere was depressing and even desperate. If they were not in the cold wilderness, perhaps the Pale Yin army would have already scattered. An invisible rope became tighter and tighter between the grain delivery team and the horse gang. Although they had not shown their ferocious faces, Ning Ke knew that as they got closer to the palace, the horse gang would lose all opportunities if they did not attack. Therefore, this rope would eventually break. The wilderness was not entirely made up of frost grass and black soil. There were also abandoned mud cities and undulating hills. Around a wilted poplar forest, the grain delivery team temporarily stopped to rest. The Yin general looked at the horse gang outside in fear, but he still sent out scouts. Although it was meaningless, it was at least reassuring. If there are no reinforcements, we won't be able to defend the food team. Now we are not far from the palace. Whether it is the elite cavalry of Chanyu or the cavalry of Divine Hall, they may encounter us. My problem is that even if they can't see the fireworks, you should have a way to inform them, since you are such a powerful talisman master. Ning Ke looked away from the map and asked Emo Shanshan beside him. His tone was a little solemn. Emo Shanshan was as calm or indifferent as usual, as if she could not see the horse gang outside. After a period of silence, she looked at Ning Ke and blinked her sparse and long eyelashes. She said, "The Divine Hall is going to escort several important people to the palace. There should be a team of papal cavalrymen. According to their route, they should not be far from us. They should have seen the fireworks last night." Ning Ke stared at her dull and confused eyes and asked, "If they did not see the fireworks, would they know we are here?" Emo Shanshan nodded slightly, her straight black hair cascading down her shoulders like a waterfall. Ning Ke calmed down a little and took out a water bag to drink. After a moment of silence, he said, "If there are no reinforcements, I will retreat first when I can't hold on. Do you want to come with me?" The "you" in this sentence referred to the disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom, not the Yin cavalry and the people from the Yin Kingdom. Cat Girl came to deliver food and happened to hear Ning Ke's words. She blushed and said, Senior brother, how can you do this?" Ning Ke did not explain anything and rubbed the little girl's head lovingly. He looked at Emo Shanshan, who had her head slightly lowered, and continued, "You should know that I'm a very cold-blooded guy. The first thing I consider is my own survival. If there are no reinforcements and the horse gang attacks, the grain team will not be able to hold on at all. If you still want everyone to survive at that time, it is equivalent to sending your younger sisters and brothers into a desperate situation. So I hope you can be more resolute when the time comes." Because there were 600 horse gangs spying outside, the grain team was extra vigilant and careful every time they stopped to rest. In addition to sending out scouts, the grain carts would also be densely arranged in a circle to prevent the horse gang from breaking into the camp. Although this would bring a lot of trouble, compared to death, no one would think it was too troublesome. Suddenly, there was a noise under a dying poplar tree. Ning Ke stood up and looked in that direction. He shook his head, put on his mask, and walked over. Cat Girl followed behind him curiously. The Yin general stared at Zhuozhua in front of him with a gloomy face and said with hatred, "If it were not for you Southerners, how could I be assigned to such a deadly task? You still want me to hold on and wait for reinforcements in this situation? I only have 200 people, and there are at least 700 to 800 horse gang. How can we hold on? How can we fight this battle? My attitude is very clear. I will take my people and break out of the encirclement immediately. As for the grain, it is not a big deal to leave it to the horse gang. As long as people are alive, it is more important than anything else. If you want to die with the grain, that is your own business." Zhuozhihua suppressed the anger in her heart and pointed to the frightened people around her. She said, "What about these people? They are the people of the Yin Kingdom. As a general, can you not care about their life and death?" "Who will care about my life and death?" The Yin general waved his hand angrily and signaled his trusted aide to gather the cavalry. He was ready to break out of the encirclement while the horse gang was still far away. Around the winter poplar forest, some of the people of the Yin Kingdom heard the conversation and knew that their general was going to abandon them. They immediately fell into a greater panic. There were discussions and cries everywhere. Some of the people even looked at the cavalry with hatred in their eyes. Zhuozhihua and two great River Kingdom girls held the ebony hilts of their swords and stood in front of the Yin general. Zhuozhihua lowered her voice and tried to persuade him, but there was no response. The Yin general saw that the horse gang was getting restless and became even more anxious. He pulled out his saber and stared at the great River Kingdom girls in front of him. He scolded coldly, "If you want to stop me, you will have to ask my saber first." Ning Ke stood behind Zhuozhihua and looked at this scene. He frowned. He still did not know the name of the Yin general, and he did not care about his name. He believed that if the general dared to attack, he would die instantly under Zhuozhihua's sword. However, the situation was tense at this time. If there was an internal dispute or even an internal fight, then the hundreds of people in the grain team would all die, even if the horse gang did not come to attack. How could he keep these 200 Yin cavalrymen here without causing any internal strife? Then he would end the internal conflict as soon as it started. The sparks would be extinguished and the chaos would not start a prairie fire. Ning Ke appeared from behind Zhuozhihua and stood in front of the Yin general. The Yin general looked at the young man wearing a bamboo hat and a black mask. He was slightly stunned. Along the way, he only thought that Ning Ke was an ordinary male disciple of the Black Ink Garden. He did not know why he stood out at this time. Ning Ke looked at the knife in the Yin general's hand. He did not ask if the knife agreed. He pulled out the padao from behind him and slashed at the cold winter wind. The knife rose and fell. The Yin general's head was separated from his body. He spat out blood and fell to the ground. Because it happened so suddenly and Ning Ke's knife was too fast and fierce, he did not even have the chance to raise his knife to block. There was an uproar. The eyes of the Yin general's trusted aides were red. They were about to pull out their knives to fight back, but Ning Ke stopped them one by one. Zhuozhihua, Cat Girl, and the other girls from the Great River Kingdom stared at the scene with their mouths agape. They looked at the corpses of the Yin army's generals that were still spurting blood on the ground and were speechless. They did not understand why Ning Ke would do this. Ning Ke gestured for them to use ropes to tie up the high-ranking officers of the Yin army. He stood in the middle of the crowd and looked at the frightened citizens. He looked at the Yin cavalrymen, who had complicated expressions of anger and fear. After a moment of silence, he pointed at the horse gang in the wilderness and said, "The horse gang, those are the horse gang. You should know how cruel they are." He looked at the Yin general who was tied up not far from his feet. He then looked up at the crowd and said, "In this dangerous situation, those who want to abandon everyone, those who are afraid of death and want to live alone must die. Those who don't listen to orders will also die. Even if I don't kill you, the horse gang outside will not let you live. So I don't want to kill too many of you. You want to live? Then fight with your lives." It was dead silent in the winter poplar forest. Both the Yin cavalrymen and the people of the Yin kingdom looked at the ordinary-looking male disciple of the Black Ink Garden and his calm eyes outside the black mask. They all felt a deep chill quickly occupying their bodies. Because of the chill, they were calm. Because of the calmness, they understood that what he said was right. Cat Girl looked at Ning Ke's back as he walked towards the horse carriage in the forest. She opened her big and bright eyes in confusion and scratched her head. She realized that she could not understand this senior brother of the academy. He had just advised the Hill Master to retreat in advance. Why did he react so strongly when the Yin general was about to leave? The curtain of the carriage was lifted, and Mo Shanshan looked at him and said, "Most of the fickle people I know are despicable. I'm not a Yin. These Yin cavalry and civilians have nothing to do with me. Their lives have nothing to do with me. But as a Yin general, he has no right to abandon his people. The reason why I killed him has nothing to do with these reasons. It is purely because his death is more beneficial for the rest of us to live. As for being fickle," Ning Ke began to check his bow and arrows. He lowered his head and said, "If we really can't hold on, I still suggest that you leave with me. So my attitude is not fickle. I am the same as that Yin general. We are both afraid of death. The only difference is that I have the ability to kill him, but he does not have the ability to kill me. 3,000 left. Keep fighting." To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 217. The winter wind blew in the wilderness all the time. The wind might not be strong, but it was like a comb piercing deep into one's clothes, taking away the warmth of one's body. Emo Shanshan was still wearing that thin white dress. The dark blue belt around her waist was like a deep lake, forming a strong contrast with her flat and unfocused eyes. Her ink-like eyebrows slowly raised as she looked at Ning Ke and asked, "You killed their general. Aren't you worried that the Yin cavalry will hate you and not contribute in the battle, or even surrender to the horse gang? Cultivating trusted officers in the army would definitely harm the interests of the lower-ranked soldiers. So the dead general's relationship with the cavalry is not very good, especially since they are from the Yin kingdom. I am a Tang. I know this very well." Ning Ke used his fingers to carefully check if the straw ropes on the hilts of the three swords were strong. He lowered his head and replied, "When I killed the Yin general and subdued the officers, the 200 Yin cavalry were indeed angry, but not sad. That is to say, they are not sad. This anger is more from fear and uneasiness." Emo Shanshan looked at the bamboo hat that covered most of his face and said, "They are afraid of you. Fear makes people want to stay away. Perhaps it is because of this that they might surrender to the horse gang. As a soldier, even if you are a weak soldier from the Yin kingdom, surrendering to the horse gang is a very difficult decision. But such a decision requires thinking, and thinking requires a relaxed mental environment." Ning Ke raised his head and looked at the horse gang who were still patrolling in the wilderness but did not attack. He said, "The situation is too tense now. Arrows can fall on their heads at any time. The Yin Kingdom's cavalry have no time or environment to think. They're like a herd of wild horses that have lost their leader. As long as one horse rushes out, they will follow it blindly. What I want is for them to follow blindly." Emo Shanshan looked at his profile and asked, "You were in the army before?" Ning Ke nodded. Emo Shanshan gently stroked the hair on her cheek and said after a moment of silence, "Being with you, I can indeed learn a lot." Ning Ke looked at her and smiled. He said, "You are welcome. What you can learn from me is actually not good. If possible, I hope that I will never have the chance to learn these things in my life." After losing their high and mighty generals and officers who only knew how to suck up to them, the 200 Yin cavalrymen were not that sad. They were just a little angry. And it was precisely because they had lost their leaders that their anger quickly turned into helplessness. In the end, they just quietly obeyed. Any army that was good at fighting must have its own unique temperament. Unfortunately, the Yin army did not have such temperament. If it were any other Tang army, they would not have obediently obeyed the enemy's command after their general was killed. Ning Ke was very satisfied with the unique temperament of the Yin army. He did not appear in front of the curtain to personally command. Instead, he passed down the orders through Emo Shanshan's carriage. Zhuo and the other 3 disciples of Black Ink Garden temporarily replaced the positions of the Yin military officers. They reorganized the camp, recalled the sentries, and strengthened the defense. All the orders were carried out as quickly as possible. No one, including the Yin cavalry, had any complaints. The order and atmosphere were even better than before. The grain team continued their journey north with over 600 horse gang following them. According to the orders from the carriage, the speed of the entire grain team was precisely controlled within a certain range. They were constantly changing their speed, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Although this was undoubtedly a torture for the Yin cavalry and the people driving the carriages, they still managed to persevere and cause some trouble for the horse gang. The most dangerous part of the twilight was spent in silence. The grain team dragged into a long line and wearily entered a low-lying area in the wilderness. The sky was already dark and the light was blurry. The so-called low-lying area was due to the rising meadows on both sides. In the dark, one could not see the end of it. It was like the mountain valleys in the south, just that the terrain was slightly gentler and not as steep. The dozens of Yin cavalrymen who were leading the way were surprised when they heard the whistle from behind. The whistle meant that the grain team had decided to set up camp here. Anyone with some military knowledge would not choose to set up camp in such a low-lying area. There were meadows on both sides of the low-lying area. If the hundreds of horse gang used the terrain to rush down, the grain team would be stretched into a long line. The fragile defense would be broken in a short time. It was extremely dangerous. Then, the latest orders came from the carriage. The grain team was to form a formation and break the carriage boards to act as a shield. However, they did not ask the people to dig pits or set up tripping ropes in the dark areas on both sides. It gave the impression that the people in the carriage had given up on defense and were waiting for the horse gang to attack. The last rays of twilight came from the sky, reflecting the blood of the dying struggle. The low-lying area where the grain team set up camp was already dark. One could vaguely see people hurriedly dismantling the carriage boards and smoke rising from the kitchen. Suddenly, the smoke that had just risen not too high suddenly stopped, as if it was frozen by the cold air. The busy people raised their heads to look at the meadow on their left. Their bodies suddenly stiffened and there was silence. Hundreds of horse gang appeared on the meadow, a few hundred feet away. This was the closest the horse gang had been to the grain team in the past few days. The black mass of horse gang controlled the reins and stood indifferently above, under the light of the setting sun. It looked like a dense forest that was burning fiercely, giving off an extremely strong sense of oppression. Ninkei lifted his bamboo hat a little and looked at the horse gang in a strict formation on the meadow. He slowly frowned. He noticed that the horse gang today was more disciplined and more silent. None of the horse gang rode their horses to provoke them. He noticed that there were more than 10 riders at the front of the horse gang. The reason why he said there were more than 10 riders was because he was sure that these 10 or so horse bandits with their faces covered had never appeared in his line of sight in the past few days. This meant that these 10 or so horse bandits had just arrived today, and the alarming change of the ranks of the horse bandits was due to the arrival of these horse bandits. Even if they are not the representatives of the forces behind them, these 10 riders should be the ones in charge. Ninkei looked at the horse gang, who were pointing at the camp with their horsewhips. He looked at the cloth that covered their faces and said in a low voice, "If there is a chance, think of a way to kill these 10 riders. Maybe we can get out of this." Mo Shanshan stood beside his shoulder and looked indifferently in that direction. She said, "You once said that the horse gang's target is not the grain. Killing people to intimidate them will not work. The horse gang is the horse gang. The horse gang that is kept by others is still the horse gang. They are more afraid of death than anyone else. And I believe that whether it is the palace or the Prince of Yin, if they want to keep so many horse gang in the wilderness, they have to keep them separately." Ninkei looked at her and said, "This means that these horse gang do not belong to each other. They only listen to the leader of the horse gang who just arrived today. Kill these people, and the horse gang will definitely lose their fighting spirit." Then he looked at her and added seriously, "Again, you're the strongest person in the whole team, so you must not fight until the last moment. Otherwise, it will be a waste." Mo Shanshan's eyelids drooped slightly. Her sparse, long eyelashes rested on her fair skin, reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. She was very beautiful. Her slightly puffed cheeks were very cute, but her silence was unbearable. Ninkei ignored her and took the heavy package off the back of the big black horse. He stuffed it into the horse carriage behind him and said seriously, "The things in the package are very important to me. Keep them safe from me." Mo Shanshan raised her head and looked at him. She said, "Your secret?" Ninkei said, "That's right. You seem to have a lot of secrets." "You have many too," Ninkei said. Mo Shanshan squinted her eyes and asked, "Why are you not worried about the horse gang's night attack along the way?" Ninkei looked at her squinted eyes and the beautiful little wrinkles at the corner of her eyes. He could not help but think of the leaves of a certain plant, like a willow. The reason is very simple. It is because it is difficult to find the hidden property of the caravan at night. They wait until the day to search, but they are afraid that the border army will see the warning and come to search. Moreover, a night attack will reduce their riding and archery skills. Their most incisive methods will be reduced, and this is something that the horse gang cannot bear. It is rare for them to follow us for so many days. Mo Shanshan slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "Since it is rare, why can't they launch a night attack? Ninkei found that he could easily be defeated by this girl in white. After a moment of silence, he said, "These are the principles that the ancestors of the horse gang summed up with blood and death. They will not deviate from them." Or it can be said that they do not want to deviate from them, because it is already an instinct that is deeply rooted in their bones. Ninkei looked at her and said, "Just like when you write a talisman, you do not need to think about how to write that talisman. The ink brush in your hand will make a choice in advance before you're thinking and move on its own." Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly and asked, "You also know talisman?" Ninkei smiled gently and answered, "A little. Perhaps it was because of the impending battle, or perhaps it was because the twilight was too beautiful and the night was too close." But in his eyes, Mo Shanshan had become much more pleasing to the eye. Although her gaze was still proud, cold, and dull, he thought to himself that with her reputation and status in the world, it was only right. At the same time, Mo Shanshan also felt that this young Tang man had become more pleasing to the eye. That night, Ninkei spent the night with the Yin cavalry at the back of the group. He ordered the Yin cavalry to sleep with his horse and was not allowed to take off their armor. He also put on a light armor of the Yin army. "Reinforcements are on the way. As long as we can last until noon, we will win." Beside the bonfire, he looked at the confused and even numb Yin cavalry and said seriously. There was finally a change in the Yin cavalry's expression. There was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. Ninkei did not know if there would be reinforcements. He only knew that the horse gang would definitely attack the next morning. If the situation was not right, he would not hesitate to ride the big black horse and escape. But he could not forget to bring his bag. He should also bring Catgirl and Zhuijihua. Mo Shanshan should also. It seemed that there were too many things and people to bring. Completed on Monday, continue tomorrow. I seem to have promised too many days. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 2:18. At some point in the morning, the horse gang, who had been following the grain team for more than 10 days, finally launched their attack. The first sound to break the darkness was not the sound of a horn, but the shrill sound of arrows. Hundreds of arrows drew arcs in the air as they shot down from above the meadow. They tore through the cold air and the lingering sleepiness in the camp, whistling as they plunged down. Even though the grain team was mentally and physically prepared for the attack, they still fell into chaos. In the rain of arrows, they screamed in fear and hid in all directions, trying their best to crawl into the carriages around the caravan. The sharp and ice-cold arrowheads pierced through the sturdy carriage boards and were unable to penetrate any further. However, there were still some arrows that easily pierced through the torsos and limbs of the civilians and soldiers, causing blood to spurt out and causing miserable howls of pain. In the blink of an eye, they had caused great damage and death. The Yin cavalry at the southernmost part of the low-lying land was not in the camp. They were attacked by the arrows at almost the same time, but because of Ninkei's reminder last night, they reacted faster. They all picked up simple shields in front of them or hid behind the rocks, watching the arrows fly over their heads nervously. The Yin horses neighed and galloped in the low-lying land. A few horses could not withstand the arrow wounds on their bodies and fell heavily to the ground. Ninkei ordered the Yin cavalry to ignore the thinning arrow rain and gather their mounts as quickly as possible. "Everyone, get on your horses and prepare to charge." Ninkei jumped onto the big black horse and looked up at the edge of the rising meadow in the northeast. He was familiar with the horse gang's fighting style. These bandits did not have any supplies and did not have the habit of carrying a large number of arrows with them. Even though they had planned this attack for a long time, the horse gang still could not deal a fatal blow to the grain team by attacking from a distance. In the end, the horse gang still had to charge through the camp. It was as if a black forest had suddenly sprouted at the edge of the rising meadow in the northeast. Hundreds of mounted bandits dressed in leather armor and thick cloth appeared there silently. The scimitars in their hands seemed exceptionally cold under the first ray of sunlight. It was so cold that everyone in the low-lying area breathed heavily. On the slope of the meadow, a masked horse gang at the front slowly raised the machete in his hand and gave the order to attack. Ning Ke noticed that the horse gang leader was not holding a machete, but a straight one. Hundreds of mounted bandits dashed down the meadow in the direction of the straight blade. In the beginning, the clattering of hooves was a little messy and slow, but as the horses sped up, it became more and more concentrated and orderly. Over 1,000 strong hooves stomped heavily on the slightly hardened surface of the meadow, causing the entire ground to shake. In the early hours of the morning, the wilderness was like a boundless drum. The orderly sound of horse hooves was like a heavy hammer falling on the surface of the drum. Every time the drum fell, the earth would shake. The sound of the drum was like thunder, and the sound of horse hooves was like thunder. The camp, which had just been baptized by the rain of arrows, had just calmed down a little from the chaos. The soldiers and commoners, who were holding weapons and even wooden sticks guarding behind the carts, could feel the ground tremble beneath their feet. They heard the deafening hoofbeats and looked at the horse gang coming down like a black flood from above the meadow. They could not help but show a look of despair. At this moment, more than 10 disciples of Black Ink Garden from the Great River Kingdom tightly grasped the black wooden handles at their waists. They pulled out slender swords and stood up. They shouted at the soldiers and civilian workers beside them to raise the weapons in their hands and walk to the back of the carriage. These disciples of Black Ink Garden were only teenagers. This time, they had received an edict from the Divine Hall and came to the wilderness for training. Before this, they had never seen such a dangerous and bloody battlefield. However, the people of the Great River Kingdom, who were deeply influenced by the temperament of the Tang Empire, were also persevering and did not know what fear was. Looking at the approaching horse gang, the ferocious faces of the horse gang, the bright scimitars in the hands of the horse gang, and listening to the arrogant whistling of the horse gang, the young and childish faces of the Black Ink Garden disciples did not show a trace of nervousness or despair, because the calmness made them more determined and resolute. The calmness and determination of the Great River Kingdom girls influenced the Yin soldiers and civilian workers in the camp. They subconsciously raised the crude wooden spears in their hands. Although their hands holding the spears were still trembling uncontrollably, at least they finally had the courage to face the bleak situation and the ferocious enemies. The sound of horse hooves was getting louder and louder, and the horse gang was getting closer. The smoke and dust between the meadow slopes at dawn was getting thicker, the air was getting colder, and the atmosphere was getting more and more tense. Everyone in the camp had panic in their eyes, but they still had a glimmer of hope. They breathed faster and faster, waiting for the moment when the horse gang would rush to the front of the carriage. Ning Ke was also waiting, but the time he waited was shorter. He looked at the faintly discernible 100-horse gang on the meadow to the northwest. These horse gang had snuck in last night, and now they appeared on the meadow. However, they did not charge at the Yin cavalry. It was obvious that they wanted to suppress the Yin cavalry, so that the 500-horse gang could gather all their strength and charge at the camp successfully. Ning Ke would not fight with these 100-horse gang. He turned his head to look at the smoke and dust on the meadow slope to the north, and saw that the hundreds of horse gang were about to rush down the slope and into the low-lying area. He pulled down the bamboo hat on his head and pulled out the padao from his back, signaling the 200 Yin cavalry following him to get ready to charge. "Don't ask how to charge, just follow my horse." He looked at the nervous Yin cavalryman beside him and said this without any pre-battle encouragement. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he pointed his padao at the meadow on his right and kicked the horse's abdomen with both legs. The big black horse neighed twice, kicked its hooves, and galloped forward like an arrow. The 500 mounted bandits were like a black tide. They relied on the gentle slope of the meadow to increase their speed. In the span of a breath, they had already charged down the meadow and arrived at the low-lying area between two meadows. The low-lying area was covered with black soil and coarse gravel. It looked rather solid and was about 100 feet wide. The camp of the grain team was in the center of the area. With the speed of the horse gang, it would not take them too long to reach the camp from the low-lying area. What was more frightening was that if there were no traps or tripwires to slow down the horse gang, the hundreds of horse gang could easily crush the grain team camp with their speed. There were no tripping ropes or pits. There were no obstacles on the flat and solid low-lying ground. The soldiers and commoners at the back of the caravan looked at the clearly visible faces of the horse gang and felt a chill down their spines. Their hands, which were tightly holding onto their spears, trembled even more violently than before. If they did not know that they would die if they surrendered and fled, they would probably just need someone to shout, and everyone would throw down their weapons and scatter in all directions. There was a great disparity in strength between them and the grain team. The grain team was located below the meadow, and they had lost the terrain. Without any preparation, how could they stop the ferocious horse gang? It seemed that there was no way to save the grain team. Although the 200 yin cavalrymen from the south had already started galloping towards them, the horse gang had already charged into the camp and started a massacre by the time they arrived. Furthermore, the 200 yin cavalrymen did not choose to come to their aid in a straight line. Instead, they strangely ran towards the meadow slope in the east. What were they trying to do? The cavalrymen slowed down when they ran up the slope, and it was extremely exhausting. Did they want to become the target of the horse gang's arrows, or were they trying to escape? Thinking of Ning Kei's insistence on not setting up any tripping ropes and traps last night, and seeing the 200 yin cavalrymen running towards the east, Zhu Jihua had a bad feeling. She did not want to admit that the senior brother from the academy was such a despicable person, but other than being afraid of death, what else could explain his actions? There was no time for Zhu Jihua and the girls from the Great River Kingdom to feel sad and indignant. They could only use the corner of their eyes to look at the yin cavalrymen and the big black horse in front of them, which seemed to be getting further and further away. The horse gang surged towards them like a black cloud, their 1,000 hooves kicking up 1,000 black gravel and dust. There was a heavy thud. For some unknown reason, one of the mounted bandits at the very front fell heavily on the hard black gravel ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. The warhorse whined and could no longer stand up. Its front hooves seemed to have been broken. Following that, there was a series of heavy thuds. Dozens of cavalrymen at the front of the crazily charging horse gang fell miserably on the ground, just like the horse gang at the front. The valley was in a state of chaos. Zhu Jihua, who was gripping her sword tightly, did not know what had happened. Her eyes were filled with confusion. Then, the confusion in her eyes turned into ecstasy as more and more horse gang fell on the seemingly hard black gravel ground. The horse gang charged down the gentle slope of the meadow. By the time they reached the low-lying land in the middle of the meadow, their speed had already been raised to the maximum. Under normal circumstances, this speed would undoubtedly be the most perfect. However, the problem was that this was not a normal charge, because this low-lying land was not normal ground. In the desolate and cold wilderness, it was rare to see a low-lying land between two long, sloping meadows. This place was originally an ancient river, but it had dried up and disappeared thousands of years ago, leaving only the remains of the riverbed. As the sand and wind attacked and piled up, the appearance of the river could no longer be seen. The two sides of the river had turned into green meadows in spring and frosty white in winter, and the riverbed had also turned into seemingly solid black gravel. Even the horse gang, who ran amok in the wilderness, did not know that this low-lying land was an ancient river. Ning Kei did not know either. But last night, when he brought the grain team here and set up camp, he discovered the problem of this low-lying land. Under the thin layer of sand, all were round pebbles that were as smooth as before. The middle of the ancient river was deep, and the soil accumulated over thousands of years was the thickest. Coupled with the dead vegetation, there was not much problem for horses to travel. However, the edge of the ancient riverbank, which was now the edge of the two meadows, was only covered with a very shallow layer of black gravel. If one exerted a little more force, or even if the wind was a little stronger, it was possible to touch or see the round pebbles below, as well as the irregular natural pits. This was not a trap. It was not a trap set by Hao Ian for the horse gang. If the speed was not too fast, even the heaviest Nanshan horse carrying two people would not be trapped in the accumulated gravel over the years. However, the horse gang rushed down the gentle slope of the meadow, and their speed was too fast. The impact force between the horse's hooves and the ground was too great. Therefore, the edge of the low-lying land under the gentle slope of the meadow became a trap set by Hao Ian for the horse gang. The horse's hooves moved so fast that they almost left afterimages. They stepped heavily on the low-lying land, and their strong hooves sank deeply into the gravel. They wanted to get up, but they slid away. Because they were moving too fast, the war horse could not maintain its balance and fell heavily with the horse gang on it. A horse's hooves kicked away the black gravel, but it happened to be stuck between the round stones under the ground. At such a high speed, the war horse could not stop its downward momentum, and its heavy body was pressed horizontally. With a crack, the horse's hooves were broken, revealing blood-colored muscles and white periosteum. It was a tragic sight to behold. The dozens of mounted bandits at the front had fallen, and the majority of the mounted bandits at the back had already noticed the problem. However, because of the damned reason, their speed was too fast. They were unable to pull the reins to stop their charge. One after another, the horses charged into the edge of the low-lying area and then fell heavily onto the ground, letting out dull thuds from time to time. If the hundreds of horse gang that rushed down the gentle slope of the meadow were like a black tide, then the seemingly ordinary black gravel outside the camp of the grain team was like the famous breakwater on the coast of the Song Kingdom, a subsidiary of the West Hill Divine Kingdom. Countless invisible round stone pillars appeared, hard and mercilessly smashing the tide. The tide came in wave after wave, and broke into foam wave after wave. The waves in front fell first, and the waves behind followed. Each wave was higher than the last, and each wave pressed on the last, and each wave was more miserable than the one before. The scene in the slanting valley was extremely bloody and cruel. Countless horses fell to the ground, and countless horse gang fell to the ground, their legs broken by the heavy bodies of the horses. They frantically pushed the horses, but it was useless. The lucky horses and horse gang directly fainted or died, while the unlucky horses and horse gang were howling in pain, especially the horse gang at the back, who had charged at high speed but fell miserably. They were densely squeezed together, and blood oozed out like pulp, smearing on the ground under the morning light. The fighting power of the horse gang was much stronger than that of the grain team. Although there were at least 100 horse gang casualties in the previous charge, as long as they were given time to regroup, even if they abandoned their horses and charged on foot, they would still bring great pressure and danger to the camp. If the hundreds of people in the camp of the grain team were the elite soldiers of the Tang army who were good at fighting, or even if they were ordinary soldiers, they could rush out of the formation of wagons with weapons and kill a horse gang with a casual stab. Perhaps the first wave of the horse gang's charge would be repelled. Unfortunately, most of the people in the camp were farmers. Under the protection of the wooden shields, they might have the courage to defend with wooden sticks and spears, but they did not have the courage to charge out of the camp to kill the enemy. More importantly, the 300 horse gang at the back had narrowly avoided the natural traps in the low-lying land. At this moment, they were holding bows and arrows, vigilantly observing the movements in the camp. Therefore, whether or not they could defeat the first attack of the horse gang depended on the 200 yen cavalrymen in the south. At this moment, the people in the camp understood that the 200 yen cavalrymen abandoned the valley and chose to ascend the meadow not to escape, but to avoid the traps that Hao Ian had hidden in the ancient river. The 200 yen cavalrymen moved ahead of time. However, as they were charging in the opposite direction of the meadow, it was a huge drain on their horsepower. Therefore, they were not fast, especially when compared to the big black horse that looked like a bolt of black lightning. The moment the yen cavalrymen moved, the 100-horse gang who were monitoring and suppressing the yen cavalrymen on the meadow to their left immediately moved. These horse gang rushed down the meadow as fast as they could, wanting to make a detour and kill the yen cavalrymen from the side. However, they did not expect the yen cavalrymen to not follow the center of the slanting valley, but towards the meadow instead. The 100-horse gang saw that they could not catch up with the yen cavalrymen. They waved their whips and whistled as they increased their speed. The sound of hooves thundered down the meadow, and they suffered the same fate as their companions who were charging him north. The cold winter wind of the wilderness hit Ning Kei's face, making his cheeks feel hot. Ning Kei heard the cries of pain coming from behind and knew that the horse gang would not be able to catch up with him. He calmed himself down and began to think of some strange questions. The cold wind could make my face hot. Was it because the wind was too strong and caused friction? But if that was the reason, How thick and hard must my skin be? Being able to remain calm in the face of a major event was a description of some outstanding human qualities. However, temperament was cultivated later on. Ninkei was used to seeing life and death since he was young. He had been through many trials and tribulations. Whenever he encountered a major event that involved life and death, he would habitually think about trivial things and then return his emotions to extreme calmness. Just like how his hands, which were holding the boxwood bough, were so calm that even when the wind blew against them, they did not tremble at all. Step, step. Straighten. Draw the bow. Midpoint. Twist the rope. Release. When the arrow left the bowstring, it was like dew dripping from the surface of a leaf. It was slow and then slightly deformed. The center of the arrow bulged outwards. With the rotation, the bulge drew an arc in the air. The arrowhead was swaying, and the feather tail was swaying. It followed a complicated curve and finally became a straight line, tearing the air and flying into the distance. The arrowhead lightly touched the rough skin that had been tortured by the scorching sun and wild wind. It was like tearing the air, easily tearing the skin like paper and tearing the flesh like cotton, bringing out thick blood and broken bones. It did not stop swaying until it pierced deep into the throat. However, the feather tail was still swaying, but became faster and made a buzzing sound when it trembled. 3 horse gang members were shot in their throats. Blood spurted out, and they fell off their horses before they could even scream. Ninkei's bamboo was tied tightly by the rope. No matter how strong the winter wind in the wilderness was, it could not be blown off. There was no emotion in Ninkei's eyes that were exposed outside the mask. He only focused on the approaching horse gang. Nearly 200 horse gang members were trapped between the round rocks at the edge of the low-lying land. They were in a sorry state. 300 horse gang members were at the back, trying to forcefully reign in their territory. Their formation was extremely chaotic, especially the defense on the side. If there was a broadsword that forcefully slashed down from the side of the horse gang would definitely be defeated. He led 200 Yin cavalrymen and charged diagonally from a meadow. He wanted to make such a broadsword. There are still 5,000 words left today, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.